This is a world where every person has a chance to become a god. According to the degree of divine power, people here are divided into demigods, true gods, elders, and higher gods. Every person, having reached the age of 18, can awaken the realm of the gods and find their irreplaceable representative. There is also a gradation of ranks among the representatives. The more talented a person is, the more potential his representative may have. Potential that will allow him to develop to the highest level. Will the main character, a man who awakened the divine realm, but got a representative of the lower level, a worthless locust, be able to rewrite his fate in such conditions? Now the main character was at school, but a local bully pestered him. Zhang Bin stood in front of his desk and, calling him a brat, exclaimed, "Is he really tired of living? How dare he argue with him? He always gets what he wants. If he does not give up the divine power points voluntarily, then he gives his word that his realm of gods will be destroyed." This guy, Zhang Bin, is an arrogant school bully who was mistakenly gifted with incredible power by the heavens. His god realm contains the power of an orc army of 5,000. Han Wu exclaimed in response that he could try if he dared. And this weakling is the protagonist, Han Wu, or rather, the guy whose body he found himself in. Grew up with the most inferior representative, namely, a locust. And here the question arises, why would a weakling like him dare to answer back to a powerful idiot who was unfairly gifted by fate? It all started yesterday. He came to this wonderful world where anyone can become a god, only yesterday. Only when he came here, he found himself in the body of a pathetic spineless scumbag who, on his 18th birthday, awakened the god realm with a locust representative. When he visited his grandfather in the hospital, he said that his parents were lost in the chaotic sea of stars of the Imperial Academy. But they should be alive, he was almost certain of it. If we get the chance, he should try to find them. A girl named Qin Shuang also started pestering him, saying that if he was willing to become her slave and feed her thunder gods his locusts every day, she would guarantee that he would be able to graduate from school and get a high school diploma. Let him think carefully about her offer. And the school bully Zhang Bin started extorting 100 points of divine power from him, threatening to destroy his divine realm. Apparently, the difficulty of this game was cranked up to hellish right from the start. His only representatives are locusts, and with that, he won't be able to enter the Imperial Academy, let alone find his parents. He approached the capsule, saying that he needed to deal with this annoying Zhang Bin first. He wasn't going to just stand there and watch him ruin his life. He climbed into the capsule and put on his helmet, thinking that since he was in this world, he should at least try to fix the situation he was in. Simply giving up would be disrespectful to what had brought him here. The system reported that the connection to the god realm had begun. He successfully connected and his eyes widened, seeing green fields and mountains in front of him. He looked down in surprise and saw locusts, wondering if these were his representatives. A bunch of locusts resting on the grass. A status window opened in front of him, displaying information about him and his god realm. He had a unique talent called Heaven's Chosen Son, and he also had the divine ability of accelerating growth and sacrificing life. He currently had 1 divinity point and 0 divine power points. The power of faith is 200,000, the level of the god's sphere is the first. Now in his sphere there are 800,000 adult locusts, 160,000 young ones and 20 million eggs. MC thought and said that if you believe the memories of this body, then before he did not have the talent of the chosen son of heaven, nor the ability to sacrifice life. So, it appeared after his transfer. He opened the description of talents. The description of his talent chosen son says that he is a person who was chosen by the heavens themselves, possessing great luck. For each level achieved, he gets 1 unique ability. Sacrifice of life is an ability that allows you to sacrifice the life of a creature once a day and receive a product equal in value to the value of the life of this creature. The product itself is randomly generated after the sacrifice of life. The main character looked at the first talent and said that this must be his cheat, which he received when he was transferred to this world. But the unique ability of sacrifice of life, he probably received thanks to becoming a divine being. This is not bad at all. Maybe with these cheats he will still be able to fulfill his grandfather's last wish. But that's only if he manages to survive the encounter with Zhang Bin tomorrow. He thoughtfully looked down at the representative description window and saw that the locusts have the talent of reproduction. The degree of faith is fanatics, they obey the orders of their God. There are 3 classifications of believers: devout, fanatics, saints. He can get 1 point of faith per day. Reproduction, 300 individuals per day. The life cycle is 90 days, 15 days egg stage, 15 days juvenile stage, 45 days adult stage, 15 days old stage. And then Han Wu thought, his representatives have the talent of reproduction, their life cycle is 90 days, he can speed up their growth by using the talent of sacrificing life. 1 day in the real world is equal to 100 days in the world of the God's realm, which means that in 1 day in the real world, several generations of locusts will have time to change. A realization came to his mind and he said that he would have to take a risk and make a big bet. If he wins, he will instantly become a master. If he loses, he will lose everything and turn into a complete nonentity. The next morning he went to school and Qin Shuang came into the classroom. She immediately went to MC's place and asked, has he thought about her offer? Is he ready to become her slave? If he accepts her offer, then she promises that no one will lay a finger on him until the end of the school year. He replied that he refuses. Not expecting this, she exclaimed in surprise, did he even understand what he just said? Without her protection, he would simply be eaten alive. He replied that perhaps she was right, and he would indeed be eaten alive before he could leave here. However, he would still prefer to refuse. Even weaklings like him had some dignity. He really appreciated the fact that she cared about him so much, but he had already made up his mind. If she had nothing else to say, then she could go. She turned around and walked away from his seat in displeasure, and lastly said that he would regret his decision. After that, he sighed heavily and Zhang Bin and his friends immediately approached him, asking if he had asked for the 100 points of divine power in front of him. One of his friends told him not to be stupid, and not to make them strain themselves. The second demanded that he hand over the points quickly, or they would destroy his pathetic god sphere. The protagonist looked at them tiredly, but suddenly Zhang Bin put his hand on his shoulder and he got angry, telling him to put it away. The bully asked irritably, was he really tired of living? How dare he argue with him? If he didn't give up his divine power points voluntarily, then he gave his word that he would destroy his god sphere. Han Wu frowned and told him to try if he dared. Hearing this, Zhang Bin was confused and wondered in surprise what was wrong with him today. Usually he was afraid to even raise his head, but now this. He turned his gaze to Qin Shuang, thinking that he was definitely not doing here. His friends started to set him up for a fight, and one of them said that he had never seen what a destroyed god sphere looked like. Another guy happily said that his locusts greatly reduced the average strength of their class, so let him quickly deal with him and force him to leave the school. It is said that Zhang Bin's orc army is among the top 60 representatives in the school. They would be interested to see it. Zhang Bin smiled and took out a card from his inner pocket, telling Han Wu not to say later that he didn't give him a chance, he chose death himself. He even felt sorry for wasting 10 power points on a piece of trash like him. He used an invasion card, which costs 10 divine power points. It generates a portal between the realms, through which you can invade the enemy's god realm. MC became nervous, and then gasped loudly, feeling himself being sucked into the portal. A second later, he found himself in a rocky area and seeing a huge gate in front of him. He asked, "What is this?" The gate opened and behind it appeared many silhouettes with glittering red eyes. They were Zhang Bin's orcs. Meanwhile, he himself was floating in the sky in the form of a deity, and ordered his subjects to smash his enemy's pale locust army and destroy the world of his god realm. The orcs clenched their fists and raised them up, shouting loudly. Meanwhile, everyone outside was watching this through the live broadcast. One of them said that it seemed like the orc army had increased by at least 1,000 more. He thinks he is now at least in the top 50 of the school. Another guy asked in surprise, what top 50 is he talking about? Doesn't he see that every one of his orcs is armed with an iron weapon? They are already in the top 30. Another guy told them to look. There is some kind of unusual creature standing in front of his orc army. One of the disciples was surprised and said that he already has an unusual creature. Now Han Wu doesn't even have a ghost of a chance. Qin Shuang, who was standing in the middle of the crowd, sighed in displeasure, and the protagonist meanwhile summoned self-detonating locusts and ordered them to attack his enemies. Meanwhile, the disciples saw that the locusts had acquired a different color. One of them asked, What kind of red insect is this? Should locusts be like this? One of them said in surprise that it was a self-detonating locust. But he only had ordinary insects in the god realm. When did he manage to do this? And in such large numbers? The guy standing next to him asked, so what if they were elite? They were locusts, and they still are. They don't stand a chance against the orcs, so they shouldn't count much from this trash. Meanwhile, the orcs ran to attack, and the locusts rushed towards them. Upon collision, the insects exploded and a huge column of flame rose into the sky, and MC looked at this with a smile. The day before, he used his ability, leaving 1 million adults to reproduce and the rest to be sacrificed. The locusts were immediately burned in the sacrificial fire that rose into the sky like a tornado, and the system reported several options for what he could obtain. Option 1. He can obtain 10,000 goblin warriors once. This is an unusual creature. Option 2. The spring of life produces life-giving water, which better nourishes his creatures and has a beneficial effect on the environment of his god realm. Option 3. The first-level sacred artifact, the Heart of Explosion. After placing the heart into his god realm, there is a certain chance that individuals with the ability to cause explosions will be born among his representatives. Looking at the first option, he thought that it was a very tempting offer. Thanks to this option, he would be able to easily cope with tomorrow's problems. However, this is a one-time summoning, so in the end, he will remain the same weakling. The Spring of Life is what will help his representatives evolve into stronger creatures. However, this would take time, and the battle would be tomorrow. So it would not suit him. He chose the third option, which would suit him best. The reward effect was aimed at his main representatives, so it would not disappear after a while. If, of course, he was lucky and everything worked out. A red crystal appeared above his hand, which he immediately smashed, and then threw an insect with all his might, causing an explosion. Looking at the raging flames, he was glad and thought that he was lucky. The orcs would survive the explosion, but if he increased their number, something might work out. He needed to experiment with this. At present, the entire battlefield was filled with dust and smoke. The students asked, what was going on there? When the dust settled, orc corpses appeared on the field, but some of them still survived. The protagonist summoned the locusts again and sent the insects to the enemy, and Qin Shuang, meanwhile, said with a smile that it had become a little more interesting. Seeing the locusts inevitably approaching, the orc froze in place, and at the same time, his deity ordered the surviving orcs to quickly return to their home god realm. Han Wu asked with a smile, did he decide to run away? But it was too late. He stretched out his hand and ordered his representatives to catch up with them if necessary. Let them invade Zhang Bin's god realm. A huge swarm of locusts flew through the gate, and several powerful explosions were heard. Zhang Bin called out to MC in displeasure, and told him to immediately order his insects to leave his realm. Meanwhile, the locusts blew up the orcs, and Zhang Bin said that he admitted defeat, so let him remove his insects from his domain and leave his orcs alone. Han Wu asked, why is this? Didn't he threaten to destroy his realm? He thinks it would be only fair if he destroys his realm in retaliation. His opponent became nervous and said that he didn't dare. If he did that, his parents would destroy him. His father was a demigod, and his mother would become a demigod. There was no way he could handle them. The protagonist didn't let him speak and ordered the locusts to destroy his orb. They could not hold back. The insects flew towards the gate, and Zhang Bin tearfully asked MC to stop. He had lost. He promised that he would never bother him again, and would fulfill any of his conditions, just let him stop them. The protagonist replied that he didn't want anything from him. He just wanted him to suffer the fate he wanted to bestow upon him. Suddenly, a stern male voice sounded behind him, saying that this was enough, let him stop. It was teacher Lu Letian. He ordered Han Wu to stop and said that he had already won, so there was no point in going that far. Zhang Bin called out to the teacher and asked him to stop this madman. But MC didn't listen and didn't stop the locusts, and in the meantime, they started to core Zhang Bin's god realm. At that moment, he himself felt pain and asked the teacher to help him, after which teacher Lu called out to Han Wu and told him not to pretend that he didn't hear him. He replied that he heard him perfectly well. Let him ask him a question, what is he doing here? He replied that he was their homeroom teacher, he was the one responsible for them. So it was only natural that he decided to stop this madness. MC said that he would ask him another question then. Where was he when Zhang Bin and the others bullied him and extorted God points from him? Why didn't he intervene? Lu Leqian thought that he was a real idiot for not understanding this. Would he expose himself for a piece of trash like him? Zhang Bin's parents were demigods. He replied that they would talk about it after he stopped doing this. The protagonist said that he would ask him one last question. If it were him in Zhang Bin's place, would he have intervened in the fight? The teacher was confused and remained silent, and Han Wu, accepting this answer, said that he thought so. His locusts blew up the core inside the god realm and the portal inside began to collapse, and Zhang Bin screamed loudly. Meanwhile, the protagonist turned to the teacher and asked him to leave his domain immediately. The live broadcast ended, and all the students were shocked by what had happened. Zhang Bin, who was sitting on the floor, cursed quietly and said that he really did it. At this moment, the homeroom teacher entered the classroom and ordered Han Wu to come to him immediately. Not seeing him in the classroom, he exclaimed, "Where is that insolent man?" One of the students replied that he seemed to have gone home. The teacher clenched his fist in rage and said that he would definitely get him expelled. Meanwhile, inside the MC God sphere, he stood in the middle of a deserted field and said that it was time to take stock. A system window appeared in front of him, which reported the number of his representatives. Now in his sphere there are 18,019 self-detonating locusts and 4,050,643 ordinary individuals. Looking at this, the protagonist decided that he would have to start breeding individuals. They will still be useful to him. And now he will attach the fragment of the core of the Zhang Bin God sphere, which he received after the battle, to his core. A red crystal appeared above his hand and the attachment began, from which the area of his god sphere increased to 260 square kilometers. Fertile lands are 100 square kilometers, mines 20, forests 40, deserts 60 and mountains 40. He also received the core of the second-level divine city, a first-level sacred artifact, the orc hammer. He now has 820 orcs and several pieces of iron equipment. Han Wu said that it was not bad, it would be enough for him to last until he graduated. He remembered what his enemy had said about his parents, and thought that he would not be able to cope if two demigods came out against him at once. And judging by Teacher Lu's behavior, the school would not protect him. He would have to rely on his own strength. He decided to exchange the iron hammer, thinking that maybe someone would offer him something more useful in exchange. A second later, a system notification appeared in front of him and he asked, "So fast?" The system reported that someone had responded to his exchange request. He was offered one flame lava crystal. He said that these crystals seemed to increase the representative's resistance to fire. This can also increase the power of the explosion. He agreed to the exchange, saying that it would significantly strengthen his locusts. After that, a red crystal floated above him in the air and a new type of locust called magma locusts appeared. The power of faith is 1/5 of a point per day. They reproduce up to 20 individuals per day. The life cycle is 250 days. The protagonist picked up a locust from the ground, then threw it aside and, seeing a powerful explosion, said that now the explosive power of these babies can be compared to the power of some hand grenade. Magma also flies apart from the explosion. The damage and radius of destruction are impressive. He can consider that he now has a bunch of fragmentation grenades. Meanwhile, Zhang Gang, Zhang Bin's father, came to the deputy director's office and said discontentedly that the core of his son's god sphere was destroyed, and now it cannot be restored in any way, and their school still has not given him an explanation. The vice principal named Sume said that as far as she knew, the one who had been invading another student's god realm was his son, who had been bullying some students for a long time. He didn't want to listen to her and asked in a rage, so she was saying that his son was the only one to blame for this? So neither the school nor the teachers had anything to do with this, right? His wife said that she thought that the student who had destroyed her son's core should be punished. The school should at least expel him. Meanwhile, the protagonist decided to use his growth acceleration skill to make as many magma locusts as possible. But before he could do anything, Vice Principal Su called him and he frowned, thinking that this was to be expected. He answered the call and she said that she needed to talk to him about something. Recently, his classmate Zhang Bin's parents had visited and they had demanded that he be expelled. She recalled their conversation earlier, how the student's mother had furiously demanded that MC be expelled. The deputy replied that, as she had said before, they had already found out that Zhang Bin was the one who had provoked this conflict and had invaded Han Wu's god realm first. He had to accept this challenge. It was just self-defense. So they had no reason to expel him. Mrs. Du exclaimed, so their school would continue to cover up for the idiot who had destroyed his own classmate's god realm? Deputy Su calmly replied that she seemed to be missing something. Han Wu had always been an obedient, diligent student, and they had irrefutable evidence of their son's bullying. Mrs. Du told her to stop spouting such nonsense. Let them just say whether they would expel him or not. Su Mei apologized and said that they would not expel him. Zhang Gang said that he could accept the fact that the school would not expel that student. However, as a father, he simply cannot leave things like this. If they do not grant him one small request, then he will no longer worry about the reputation of their school. After telling Han Wu about this conversation, she said that in the end, Zhang Bin's father proposed to send a detachment of 1,000 of his representatives against him. He no longer cares about the result of invading his god realm. He said that this will calm him down. She is sorry, but this is all their school could do. He would not make any big concessions. However, she wants to warn you that even 1,000 representatives of a demigod is a terrifying force. The strength of his representatives is comparable to 50,000 relatively strong representatives of some high school student. Will he be able to handle this? The protagonist thanked her for her help and said that he will come to school tomorrow and settle everything. After ending the call, he said that apparently, one explosive locust will not be enough for him. He will have to speed up a little. After that, he used the sacrifice ability again and took 4,008,000,000 lives. A powerful explosion occurred in his god sphere, after which he was offered 3 options. He can get a first-level sacred artifact of bloody demonic eye. After absorbing it by the core of the god sphere, there will be a certain chance of the birth of representatives with a bloody eye. The bloody eye improves the wearer's dynamic vision at the sight of blood and enters a berserker state. The second option, he can get a first-level crystal, a fireball. After absorbing the crystal by the core of the god sphere, there will be a certain chance of the birth of representatives who own the initial fireball skill. If a hero-type representative is born, he can master the highest technique of the fireball. The third option, he can get the Emperor of the Wind Sword, a heroic type of representatives of the Wind Sword. After looking through all the options, he said that for so many lives this is very good. He chose the third option, after which an old man appeared in front of him, who was the Emperor of the Wind Sword. He has the skill Whirlwind of the first basic level, Fury of the second level, Storm Slash of the third level, and Iron Sword Style of the 5th level. The last skill is created by himself. It is impossible to estimate. The degree of faith is fanatic. The power of faith is 500,000 points per day. Life expectancy is 800 years. At the moment, he has already lived for 150 years. The Emperor addressed Han Wu as a respected god and said that he needed a sword. He replied that this was no problem, after which he opened a trading network with the thought that because he had been doing nothing but accelerating the reproduction of his locusts for the past 2 days, they began to give him 100 million faith power per day. In the end, it began to gather in one point and transform into divine power points. If you take into account the points he received for selling excess lands, it will come to 54 divine power points. In the trading network, he began to examine various weapons and noticed the Whirlwind Sword. The equipment is divided into 4 categories. Ordinary equipment made of pure materials without infusion of energy. Sacred equipment, real masterpieces created from rare materials using the power of faith, often have some effects. Divine power equipment. In the process of forging this equipment, crystals of divine power were used for tempering. Often this type of equipment has its own soul, which developed on its own. Divine equipment, items that represent the power and authority of the gods. Naturally, only these same gods could master them. He bought sacred equipment, the Sword of the Whirlwind, and then handed it to the old man. To try out the sword, he swung it several times, releasing a shock wave outward, then turned to the god and said that he needed 3 more such swords so that he could release his true power. From this, the main character was very surprised and thought that this was as much as 150 points of divine power. Does he think these points grow on trees? But tomorrow he would have to fight Zhang Gang's 1,000-strong army, and demigods should not be underestimated. He would still have to try his luck. With these thoughts, He opened the system window to contact someone. Meanwhile, Qin Xuan was meditating in her god realm and did not pay attention to the birds that circled around her and landed on her body. She was very focused. She remembered a moment from her childhood. One day she fell into the river and Han Wu came running to her rescue. After pulling her to the shore, he gave her artificial respiration, and thanks to this, she woke up. Because of these thoughts, she could not continue meditating and opened her eyes, saying that he was an idiot. He would die because of his own stupidity. Her grandfather was a true god, and there were 23 demigods in her family. With her protection, he would have nothing to fear. Suddenly, a system window appeared in front of her, telling her that Han Wu was calling. She answered the call and asked if he had changed his mind and decided to become her slave after all. He replied that he just wanted to borrow some of her divine power. She asked back if she would lend it to him. So what? How was he going to repay the debt with his trash representatives? He shouldn't think that he had become much stronger just because he defeated Zhang Bin. His self-destructing locusts barely reached the criteria of an elite-type creature and weren't of much value. He replied that she should just forget about it then. He said goodbye to her and ended the call, and she clutched her head, wondering why such sarcastic words had come out of her mouth again. That's not what she had wanted to say at all. She was sure that he had gotten it all wrong now. She called him and he asked her what was the matter. She crossed her arms over her chest and asked with a displeased expression how much he needed to borrow. Let him drop his account number. After that, the main character bought the missing weapon and the emperor armed himself with 4 swords at once. MC called out to him with displeasure and said that he spent all his savings on it and also got into debt. He will have to work it all off. The next day he came to school and his classmates were surprised, asking if he is not afraid that the army of the demigod will trample his sphere of gods. The other disciple laughed and said that he must be completely crazy. His friend agreed and said that they would see if he could remain calm when the demigod army began to destroy his realm. After listening to them chatter about him, Han Wu thought that it seemed like everyone expected him to fail, but that was not surprising. Qin Xuan walked up to him and asked, so he borrowed her divine power points in the hopes of competing with the demigod? She advised him not to waste his strength. Even a demigod army of 1,000 was not something he could handle right now. He closed his eyes and replied with a smile that he had no other choice. She replied that this was nonsense, he had a choice. If he agreed to become her slave, she would ask the family to calm this Zhang gang down. His family only had 1 demigod, while hers had 1 true god and 23 demigods. He dared not disobey them. He turned away from her and said that he appreciated her concern, but his answer would not change. He sat down at his desk and ended the conversation by saying that he needed to prepare for battle. After that, she walked away from him, and his classmate began to insult him and ask why Qin Xuan was so worried about this trash. He was definitely going to die today. Soon, the teacher entered the classroom with Zhang Bin's parents and stood behind the teacher's desk, pointed his finger at Han Wu and said that it was him. Mrs. Du became angry and, calling him a little freak, exclaimed, "How dare he encroach on her son's god realm?" Her husband grabbed her by the shoulders and asked her to calm down. There was no need to break their agreement with the school. The teacher called out to his student with displeasure and told him to get up. Let him not keep Zhang gang waiting. He replied with a smile that he would rather wait for Deputy Sumei. Lu Lutian started to get angry and asked, "Does he think the deputy has nothing better to do? He alone will be enough as a spectator of this battle. So let him stop acting like he's something and that's it." At this moment, the deputy director entered the classroom and asked why he was making so much noise. He immediately calmed down and awkwardly scratched the back of his head, apologizing to her for bothering her with such a trivial matter. He was just trying to teach his students a few useful lessons. She crossed her arms over her chest and displeasedly told him not to forget that he was a teacher first and not some demigod's mutt. Is everything clear to him? Zhang Gang said that since Deputy Su was already here, it was time for them to begin. Sumei turned to Han Wu and asked if he was ready. He confirmed her words with a confident smile, after which Zhang Gang took out an invasion card and said that they would begin then. The protagonist was teleported to another space and immediately saw thousands of red-eyed wolves coming out of the portal in front of his eyes. A huge werewolf was leading this army. Meanwhile, the students were watching all of this from the outside. One of them told the others to look. His entire wolf cavalry was made up of only elite types of creatures, and the leader of his army seemed to be something beyond the elite. The wolf cavalry was a combination of green orcs and wild wolves, and they were all equipped with high-quality gear. Han Wu had no chance. Meanwhile, Zhang Gang's army stopped in front of MC and lined up, and he himself said that he would make him get what he did to his son, even if he didn't think he could leave alive. Su Mei, meanwhile, looked very surprised and thought that the wolf cavalry was made up of two types of representatives, but one orc rider and one wolf in the realm of gods count as one enemy unit. There are clearly more than 1,000 of them. He is so sneaky. Qin Shuang also noticed this and told her that this is a scam. His army has 2,000 representatives. Meanwhile, Zhang Gang ordered his cavalry to attack, and thousands of wolves rushed forward, and the protagonist released his locusts to meet them. One of the disciples said that he had almost 7 million elite-type locusts. Another guy asked, didn't he only have about 20,000 left yesterday? How could he get 7 million in one day? Even for locusts with their increased reproduction, this is a terrifying number. The guy standing next to him said that even the weakest elite-type creatures, if they have enough numbers, can become a formidable force, but it was bad luck that the battle was scheduled for the very next day. These 7 million will not do anything against the wolf cavalry. Meanwhile, the orcs riding on wolves entered the battle, and when they collided with the locusts, everything began to explode. One of the students said that he had already used up a lot of his self-detonating locusts, and the wolves and orcs didn't care at all. They only got off with minor injuries. Teacher Lu said that if it weren't for his stubbornness and thick-headedness, he would have been able to show off his talent in the future. It's a shame that their school will have to say goodbye to such talent. One of the students noticed something behind him and asked, "What is this?" Meanwhile, clouds of black smoke appeared above the wolves, after which magma locusts flew out on MC's orders. Not knowing what to do, the wolves and orcs remained in place and growled, and then the locusts collided with them and many explosions occurred. One of the students exclaimed, "What the hell is this?" The explosive power of this species is significantly higher than ordinary self-detonating locusts, and they also spray lava. Is this also an elite type of creature? Su Mei turned to the students and asked if there was anyone with sensory abilities among them. Can anyone see the information about this species? One of them confirmed her words and used his ability to say that his assessment showed that it was a magma locust, an elite type of creature. Hearing this, the vice director was very happy, and Zhang Gang, meanwhile, told Han Wu not to even dream that some insects could destroy his wolf cavalry. He ordered his subjects to use all their strength, and the werewolf leading the army roared loudly. After that, all the wolves began to howl at his command, releasing an icy fog at the enemy, which began to contain the explosions and soon calmed down the fire. One of the disciples said that a demigod is a demigod, he cannot be defeated by such tricks. Even elite types of demigod creatures have a very wide range of skills and abilities. Another disciple said that Han Wu had less than 500,000 self-detonating locusts left, and the magma ones were completely exhausted. Meanwhile, Zhang Gang said that he was showing him what despair was. Once he reached his sphere, he would be kicked out of school. Then he would have no patrons left to protect him from his wrath. His army rushed to attack and he ordered them to destroy his core. Ignoring the protagonist, the wolves ran past him and headed for his sphere. Realizing that this was the end, Su Mei looked down in disappointment, and Qin Shuang turned away. But suddenly, someone told them to look at Han Wu's sphere. There was someone standing there. She immediately returned her attention to the live broadcast. Meanwhile, an old man stood by the huge crystal, meeting the wolf cavalry. He stood confidently in place and did not move, ready to fight. One of the students said that he was holding whirlwind swords in his hands, one of which is worth 50 points of divine power. Another guy said in surprise that this is a whole 200 points. Where did he get so much? He thought Han Wu was an orphan. And what kind of creature is this? Su Mei replied with a smile, "This is a representative of the wind sword race. Such creatures below the elite type are not born." The disciple asked, "Does this change anything?" Zhang Gang also has a lot of unusual types, and he also has a wolf captain whose strength is even slightly superior to what the unusual types can have. The captain can deal with this wind sword, and at this time, the rest of the wolves and orcs will simply go and destroy Han Wu's god realm. Or is he wrong? She remained silent and thought that he was certainly right, but the fluctuations of power emitted by the wind sword did not resemble those emitted by elite types of creatures. He was most likely a hero. Meanwhile, Zhang Gang looked at the Sword Emperor in surprise, thinking that he had trained for decades and still could only raise one hero-type creature. And this brat had already done it now. He was just a high school graduate. How could he have a hero? He ordered his army to capture him, but not kill him. He would take this creature for himself. Let them destroy the boy's core and bring him a hero. The old man's eyes sparkled brightly in the meantime, and he let out a dissatisfied sigh. The orcs riding on wolves had already managed to approach him and screamed loudly, but the Sword Emperor quickly repelled the attack, using the third-level Storm Cut skill. Swinging 2 pairs of hands, he easily killed them with his other skills. Suddenly, one of the orcs screamed loudly, releasing an icy wind from his mouth, from which the Emperor's feet froze. After that, the orc raised his sword up, indicating that it was time to attack, and the wolves headed towards the wind sword. Meanwhile, he raised all 4 hands to the sky and used the iron sword style. A glow began to emanate from his swords, which swirled into a vortex of wind above his head, after which it intensified several times and he attacked, emitting a powerful shockwave from himself. Meanwhile, the disciples were very surprised and one of them said that this was too much. The battlefield became quiet and the old man looked at the corpse of the wolf in front of him. Zhang Gang cursed loudly and ordered the wolf cavalry general to raze this place to the ground. Hearing the order, the werewolf headed towards the core of Han Wu's realm, already preparing to attack. But suddenly the director's voice was heard, asking the demigod if he really thought of breaking his word. Hearing this, Zhang Gang looked up at him in surprise, and then excitedly replied that it was not so, he would not dare. He waved his hand and ordered the wolf cavalry to retreat, and the principal turned his gaze to the student of his school who was being protected by the Sword Emperor, and said that it was not bad. Thus, the battle ended and the protagonist returned to the real world. The vice principal said that he did well, but he shouldn't relax just because he was lucky enough to have a hero life form. Let him not think that heroes are invincible. With his current level, it will be difficult for him to even break into the top 3. He ignored it, and said that he had a small favor to ask of her. She asked what was the matter? He replied with a serious expression that he wanted to change classes. His homeroom teacher was very surprised and nervously waved his hands, saying that he admitted that he hadn't given him much of his time in the past, but that would change from now on. He would do his best to make him one of the best. And naturally, he will make sure that he gets all the resources he needs to develop. Let him give him another chance. He smiled nervously and thought that if he continues to develop at the same pace, he will definitely be able to enter some prestigious academy. Perhaps he will even compete for a place in the top academy. In that case, he, as a teacher, will be generously rewarded. He can't miss such an opportunity. But the protagonist was adamant and still said that he wanted to change classes. Su Mei frowned with displeasure and replied that he couldn't just change classes like that, because there were many school rules. However, if he really wanted to, he could try to pass the test that the school itself prepared. If he passed it, he would be able to transfer to another class. He immediately agreed to this, after which Qin Shuang abruptly stood up from her seat and told the deputy that she also wanted to change classes and was ready to take the test. Lu Letian became nervous and said that if she was not satisfied with something in her studies, she could tell him, her teacher. There was no need to act so rashly, they could talk about it after class. She replied that she had no complaints, she just wanted to change classes. A guy named Zhang Xiaolong, who was sitting next to her, raised his hand and said that he would also like to apply. The teacher called out to him with displeasure and exclaimed that he was the class monitor. Why did he suddenly decide to change classes? He replied that he was grateful to him for all these years of teaching, but he had good reasons for doing so. He looked at Qin Shuang with a loving gaze and thought that he would follow her, and one day she would definitely be his. The vice principal said that they would have everything ready by tomorrow. She walked to the exit and asked teacher Lu to follow her. Time passed, the sun was already beginning to set. Han Wu went outside and Qin Shuang followed him, asking where he got the heroic-type creature from. He replied that it had nothing to do with her. She exclaimed that it was not so, he owed her 150 points of divine power, and if he could not return them, he would become her slave. Therefore, she had the right to know where he got the hero from. He said that he would repay her, he could even give her 5 points as interest right now. But he would not tell her anything about the hero, that was not how it worked. After these words, he moved to his god sphere and she, looking at the portal that appeared, cursed loudly. Meanwhile, MC was already inside and looked at how many representatives he had. He had 1 billion ordinary locusts, 1 million self-detonating ones, and 30,000 magma ones. He said that he would not be able to gather a large army in a couple of days. Tomorrow's test would be difficult for him. The Sword Emperor appeared in front of him and said that the white wolves and riders hid in the mines of their world. Should he get rid of them? He frowned, thinking that he knew that some of the Wolf Valeria did not have time to escape with Zhang Gang and hid somewhere in his divine realm. They cannot be left alive, they may start to destroy his other representatives. However, it would be a waste to simply kill them. He ordered him to capture them, but not kill them, he needed them alive. Hearing the order, he went to search, and after 2 hours he dragged them to his god. After looking at them, he decided to sacrifice 24 wolves and 1 billion ordinary locusts, after which a tornado swirled around him. The system gave him 3 options to choose from: an alpha mechanism, a level 1 artifact, a smelting furnace blueprint, which allows you to create a large furnace capable of producing sacred type equipment. And he also got 3 observation towers, which provides visibility and prevents sudden attacks by the enemy. MC said that the alpha mechanism is of course good. But will he be able to control it through his brainless locust? And a furnace, how will the locusts make anything in them? An observation tower, what will he even be able to see from such a small height? Among the 3 options, there is not a single one worthwhile. He remembered that he had a couple of 100 orcs left, which he received after defeating Zhang Bin, and he wondered what they were doing now. Widening his eyes, he activated the falcon eye and saw what the orcs were doing now. They were digging ore and building a city, and seeing that the deity was watching them, they thanked him for giving them a wonderful life. After that, Han Wu remembered that after the victory, he ordered them to mine the clan and said that apparently this clan was originally predisposed to mining ore and creating something, and Zhang Bin spat on all this and made ordinary warriors out of them. He continued to observe and said that they really did have a talent for this. Perhaps he could turn them into equipment manufacturers, then the furnace might come in handy. He put the structure in front of them and said that he would give them a smelting furnace, and hoped that they would live up to his expectations. The orcs were very happy and exclaimed that God had given them a furnace, they would not let him down. Meanwhile, the teachers of the school called a meeting. Teacher Lu Letian turned to his colleagues and said that he thought they all already knew that the school was going to hold tests for promotion to another class for Han Wu, Qin Shuang, and Zhang Xiaolong. The school entrusted them with preparing the tests. What do they think about this? One of the teachers asked. What is there to think about? They are very grateful to him for such a gift. After all, 3 of the best students in his class will come to one of them at once. Teacher Lu said with displeasure that he will say it directly. He does not care what kind of tests they prepare for Qin Shuang and Xiaolong, but he demands that the difficulty of the test for Han Wu be raised to the highest. They must somehow punish the student who does not respect his teacher. He has never crossed them and supported them in every way, so he asks them to give in to him this time. While waiting for an answer, he thought that Su Mei almost ate him alive yesterday because of the sudden transfer of these 3. Because of this, the performance of his class for the semester has noticeably dropped, so he is obliged to put Han Wu in his place. The other teachers agreed to his proposal, saying that they will never forgive themselves if they cannot thank him for his kindness. The day of the test came. When all the students gathered in the classroom, he handed out tests to 3 of them. Xiaolong received a level 1 test, he must defend against 1,000 intruders, and Qin Shuang received the same. But Han Wu was clearly amazed by his assignment. In order to move to another class, he must defend against 10,000 intruders. This is a level 10 test. Su Mei asked the teacher if he didn't think he was too biased towards the student. He replied that this was the decision of all the teachers, not his personal decision. The protagonist said that everything was fine, the teacher just wanted him to demonstrate his abilities to the new teacher. He stepped aside and his homeroom teacher displeasedly told him not to be so self-confident. Qin Shuang approached her old friend and said that her offer still stood. If he agreed to become her slave, no one else in the school would dare to bully him. He thanked her for her concern and said that they would see each other after the tests. She frowned with displeasure and said that he was ungrateful. Xiaolong meanwhile smirked and mentally told Han Wu that he was an idiot. He was digging his own grave. Soon the test began. An army of goblins appeared in the protagonist's god realm, and the students who were watching this asked, "Can they see it?" Han Wu's difficulty is much higher than those two. Another student asked, who asked him to anger the teacher? Now he is paying for his pride. MC meanwhile cursed loudly and began to curse Teacher Lu, saying that there are red goblins with excellent fire resistance, and there are so many of them. Lu Letian meanwhile smirked and said that it was his own fault for turning his back on him. An army with 10,000 red goblins will simply sweep away his locusts and quickly reach his core. One of the observers of the battle congratulated him on his victory in advance, and he replied that this was not a victory, but a useful lesson. There can be no enmity between teachers and students. Han Wu will soon understand this himself. Sumei, without taking her eyes off the screen with concern, encouraged Han Wu, and in the meantime, he ordered his army to attack. Seeing this, the goblins touched their chests, igniting fire in their hands, and then swung them, throwing fireballs. Upon collision, the fireballs began to explode and Han Wu thought that ordinary locusts did not affect them at all. Realizing this, he ordered the self-detonating locusts to join the battle and the goblins were frightened, seeing the insects quickly approaching them. After this, many explosions occurred, which killed 400 red goblins. At this time, Xiaolong and Qin Shuang came out of the capsules and one of the students told the others to look. They had already completed their tests. Qin Shuang went to the deputy, and she told her that it seemed like Han Wu would have a hard time this time. She thought that she knew it. In the end, locusts are still locusts, trash among other representatives. No matter how hard he pumped them, they still can't compare to the others. Meanwhile, the magma locust entered the battle. He was able to kill 3,000 red goblins with shrapnel explosions, but the rest were already at his core. One of the disciples said that this time he was definitely finished. Even his hero couldn't handle 6,000 red goblins at once. Qin Shuang became worried and said that this was some kind of madness. The red goblins were going to destroy his divine core. Sumei contacted MC and told him to just admit defeat. There was nothing shameful in it. He fought with dignity. She was sure that he would be able to master this test with time. He confidently replied that he had already made his decision, and she couldn't dissuade him. He would fight until his last representative. Besides, he hadn't lost yet. At this time, the Sword Emperor used his storm slash and swung his sword several times, releasing a shockwave. But the monsters screamed loudly in response and raised their hands to the sky, releasing many streams of flame and directed them straight at the old man. Many explosions occurred and one of the disciples said that even a hero has a hard time. Let them just look at this. Han Wu is definitely finished. The emperor found himself under incessant fire, and it was difficult for him to resist. Seeing this, Teacher Lu was happy and said that this would be his last lesson for him. Let him remember this well, because soon he will be left without his divine sphere. The guy standing next to him, surprised, told him to look at the screen. Meanwhile, an army of orcs arrived on the battlefield, which was determined. One of them raised an axe up and shouted that they would protect their god. Seeing them, the goblins were very scared, after which the main orc ordered to kill them and his brothers rushed into battle. One of the students asked in surprise, "Is this Zhang Bin's orcs by any chance?" The guy next to him asked, "Where did he get such talent from? At this rate, he will be in the top 10 by the end of the year." At this time, the orcs finally dealt with all the goblins and Han Wu was very happy, saying that they tried hard. Qin Shuang and the vice principal were happy about his victory, and Teacher Lu gritted his teeth and cursed. After that, different teachers began to call the 3 students to their classes. One of them called out to Qin Shuang and asked her to transfer to his class. He would provide her with all the necessary resources to quickly cultivate her thunder gods. Another teacher turned to Xiaolong and said that he had a secret technique for cultivating demonic representatives. He would get it if he transferred to his class. Another teacher turned to Han Wu, asking him to transfer to his class, and said that he would provide him with a very formidable army of orcs. Xiaolong ignored them and turned his gaze to his lover, thinking that where she goes, he will go too. Han Wu turned to Vice Chief Su and asked if he could find out why his test was harder than the others. She replied that all the teachers were working together to set the difficulty of the tests. Apparently, there were more of those who thought this level of difficulty was right. The protagonist grinned and asked, "Is that so? Can he see the list of those who voted?" She handed him the decision of the Teachers' Council, and the teachers who voted to increase the difficulty realized that Han Wu would not choose them now and began to curse Lu Letian. Finding those who voted against, Han Wu thanked them for it and asked if he could find out what to expect from transferring to their classes. One of them said that today he had clearly demonstrated his ability to strengthen orc creatures to them, so he decided that if he joined his class, he would provide him with an orc army of at least 10,000 individuals. With such a formidable army, he would be among the top 10 of their school in no time. After this, he might even think about entering a good academy. The second teacher named Tianwen said that he believed that the main thing for each of them was to improve and strengthen their main representatives. He had several special methods at hand that could be useful for improving insectoid types. If he joined his class, he would help him achieve the emergence of all types of locusts. Hearing this, MC immediately made a decision and said that he would like to join his class. After him, Qin Shuang wanted to join his class, and then Xiaolong also wanted to join. Tianwen was very happy and thought that at this rate, he would become the best teacher this year. 3 talented students at once decided to transfer to his class. It couldn't be better. He handed them the building cards and said that they were small gifts. Han Wu got the second-level building card, the Hive. It occupies 1 square kilometer and produces 1 million insects per year. Effect takes over all the effects that he applied to his other insectoid representatives. The protagonist was delighted and thought that this card was literally made for him. If he places the hive in his god sphere, the insects born will immediately receive the effects of the explosion heart and the fiery lava crystal. It turns out that this card will allow him to get 1 million magma locusts per year. As a sign of gratitude, he bowed to the teacher, and he told him not to rush to thank him, let him show his gratitude better through good results. After that, Su Mei turned to the other teachers and said that she thought that this could end their tests for today. However, she wanted to remind him that there would be important exams in a week, the success of which would determine the ratio of resources distributed among the classes. Let them prepare their students well. After some time, Han Wu was already in his god realm. Currently, in his realm, there were 2,040,000 common locusts, 5,000 self-detonating locusts, 300 magma locusts, 52 red orc blacksmiths, and 1 representative of the heroic life form, the Wind Sword Emperor. Looking at this, he said that it looked sad. He was afraid that if he had to take the exam tomorrow, he would end up at the very bottom of the school rankings. He urgently needed to multiply the magma locusts as much as possible and improve the other types. He finally noticed that some red orcs had appeared in his realm, and he suddenly rose into the air, deciding that he had to see it with his own eyes. He flew to the place where the red orc was right now and saw the description of this creature. This is an elite type of creature that evolved from ordinary orcs after a bloody battle. The creature has a talent for forging and fiery blood. The level of faith is fanatic. It gives 20,000 faith power per day. Reproduction, 1 individual per year. The life cycle is 80 years, 5 of which are infancy, 10 years of youth, 55 years of maturity, and 10 years of old age. The talent for forging increases the level of understanding in the field of blacksmithing, and fiery blood significantly increases resistance to high temperatures and facilitates the development of skills related to the attribute of fire. After reading the description, MC thought, so the orcs themselves were able to evolve into an elite type of creatures. This is simply amazing. It would be great if they became its main representatives. In that case, he could use the growth acceleration ability on them and significantly increase their numbers. 4 days later, he finally waited for the ordinary locusts to breed to 7,300,000,000 individuals and said that this should be enough. It was time to begin his favorite sacrifice. Having swirled the locusts in a fiery tornado, he sacrificed their lives and received a reward for this. Having quickly glanced at the proposed options, he was very happy. The first option gives him a sacred broken artifact of the second level, the Law of Gluttony. The main representatives of the divine realm receive the ability of gluttony. As soon as the energy they consume increases by 10,000 times, they evolve into creatures of the type above. The artifact is broken, works only on the ordinary type of creatures. The second option, the hero template, the creature that received the template functions up to the heroic type of creatures. The third option gives a little divinity. The main character's eyes lit up with admiration, and he said that these are such wonderful options. His eyes are already running wide. The law of gluttony will be able to turn all of his normal locusts into elite creatures. But right now, he just doesn't have enough locusts to evolve. The hero template sounds much better compared to the first option. The heroic creature type has tremendous power. A little bit of divinity is about 100 billion faith points, or 1 million divine power points. It's like winning the lottery. He chose the first option, saying that he doesn't need to be too greedy. He needs to start using the full potential of his primary representatives. He doesn't have much normal locusts left, so he'll have to grow them in a hive first. 3 days later, when he entered his god sphere, he was very surprised and said that he never would have thought that his locusts could grow to such enormous sizes. Approaching the insect that had grown to the size of a horse, he named it a magma locust plus. Sometime later, at school, before he could even sit down at his seat, Qin Shuang approached him with her favorite question: would he like to become her slave? He didn't have the support of a rich family or the necessary resources. At this rate, it would be hard for him to stand out even among the children of demigods. He had improved his locusts well, but they would soon reach their ceiling. They had too little potential. Did he understand that? His orcs were good too, but in the end, they weren't his main representatives. He replied that he was still grateful to her for caring, but she should stop asking him the same question. She would see everything for herself during the exam. She sighed in displeasure and said that he was so stubborn, after which she began to say something furiously to him, while Xiaolong watched her attentively and gritted his teeth, mentally telling Han Wu that one day he would make him disappear from his beloved's sight. Their homeroom teacher said that this exam is very important to all of them, as their results will determine whether their class will receive the school's resources and equipment, so he asked them to give it their all. The school holds sacred artifacts, additional lands for their realms, core shards, legions of various creatures, and other useful materials in their hands. However, they will only receive them if they can perform well in the exam. Now, he asked them to familiarize themselves with the rules of the exam. The exam consists of 2 stages, the selection stage and the ranking stage. During the selection stage, all students are put through tests of the same difficulty level. Those who can handle it receive 1 point and move on, while those who cannot will be expelled. After completing the first stage, students who pass the second stage can choose between refusing the ranking test or agreeing to it. The second stage involves defending against endless waves of invaders advancing on their god realm. With each wave repelled, their class will gain 1 point, and their personal ranking will increase. Han Wu asked, "Do they expel people from school right away?" "That's pretty cruel, then the rewards must be really worth it." After that, they showed the rewards. The students who are in the top 100 are given a random card of basic resources, land for the divine realm worth 100 points of divine power. If the student is in the top 50, he will receive 1 sacred artifact of the first level, and if in the top 30, then 1 reproduction card. This allows you to increase the reproduction speed of creatures by 5 times, the duration of 10 years inside the realm. If the student is in the top 20, he will receive 1 first-level building called the Temple, which spreads a first-level sacred aura within a radius of 100 meters, accelerating the recovery of wounded creatures. If the student is in the top 10, he will receive 1 divine weapon worth up to 100,000 points of divine power. The weapon style is chosen by the students themselves. If the student is in the top 5, he will receive 1 elite seed. This allows his being to feel the power of an elite type, which increases the propensity to evolve into an elite type. The students in the top 3 places will receive 1 additional level of their core, and the one who ranks first will receive 1 point of divinity. Han Wu was very happy and said that for such a reward, he can do anything. After that, their teacher said that the exam was beginning. The first stage is about to begin, so let them prepare for the test. He started the countdown, and when the time was up, Han Wu teleported to the god realm and, leading his army, ordered them all to prepare for battle. Seeing the lizard-headed monsters in front of him, he exclaimed that these were demonic golems. Isn't this too much for the first stage? Although they are considered normal types of creatures, their strength is close to elites. Tough scales, strong limbs, this monster is not an easy opponent. But fortunately, they are too slow. He pointed his hand forward and ordered 50,000 locusts to move forward and destroy them with their lava. A hail of fire from the locusts fell on the golems, and they screamed loudly, and the protagonist laughed and said that it smelled like he was at a barbecue. He wondered if he could feed them to the locusts. He called out to the red orc blacksmiths and ordered them to drag their bodies here. After 10 minutes, the locusts ate the monsters, leaving only their bones, and the protagonist asked, "So he can still feed them to them?" This is no longer an exam, but home delivery of food. He hopes that everything will continue in the same spirit. Meanwhile, the teachers were observing the exams. Teacher Lu said discontentedly that another student was expelled from the exam, and he had high hopes for him. Teacher Tian said that 20 students from his class have already been expelled, almost a third of the entire class. Their colleagues said that things are even worse in his class. Half of them have already passed. Do they think the school went a bit overboard by raising the difficulty level of the exam so much? Sume said that today their principal and his deputies are fighting the abyssal demon invaders in the borderland. She thinks he had his reasons for choosing demonic golems as their students' opponents for today's exam. It's not for them, demigods, to talk about such things. Tianwen saw his student on the screen and happily said that he had a good idea. His locusts just started devouring those demonic golems. And they seem to be doing just fine. Have they ever heard of creatures that could just eat the flesh of demons, ignoring their toxins? Another teacher asked in surprise, do they ignore the toxins contained in demons' bodies? He had never heard of such a thing. It was urgent to study it. Lu Letian asked, what's so unusual about that? The fact that they were immune to toxins didn't change the fact that locusts were just trash in terms of strength and power. It was just luck. His colleague replied that luck was also part of strength, so he shouldn't forget that. This type of locust that Han Wu had bred was very strong and useful. Let him see for himself. Locusts had already become an elite type of creature, and in terms of their potential, they were at the very bottom of the list of creatures that could transition from a normal type to an elite type. Teacher Lu told him not to make him laugh. These creatures weren't even comparable to normal goblins in terms of strength. Teacher Tian said that he felt that he was being too one-sided. He shouldn't just compare the locust's shortcomings with the advantages of other creatures. Which one did he think reproduced faster, locusts or goblins? Lu Litian crossed his arms and replied that he wasn't going to argue with him about that. He has a student in his class, Lu Mo, whose main representatives are goblins. They'd better see which of the two ends up in the final ranking. Tianwen agreed and said that something told him that he didn't just start this. Let him talk. Teacher Lu turned to the teachers and said that he would give the other colleagues a 5-star divinity rating if they witnessed their argument. Teacher Tian agreed and his colleague smirked, thinking that he was a complete idiot. Lu Mo was his nephew, so naturally he had given him far more resources than he should have. Could he boast the same towards Han Wu? Soon, the system reported that 430 students had passed the selection round of the exam, and 300 students had decided to participate in the ranking round. Lu Litian asked, did 130 of them simply refuse? They were all worthless cowards. His colleague said that he shouldn't talk about their students like that. The difficulty level of this exam was indeed higher than usual, so there was nothing shameful about it. The other teacher said that it was even for the best. They could only teach those students who could overcome their fear and survive this difficult battle. Meanwhile, the second stage of the exam began. An army of skeletons came out of the gate, and the teachers were very surprised, asking, isn't it too easy? MC disappointedly said that they must be kidding. He has more than 1 billion starving locusts here, and they offer them to gnaw their bones? But there is nowhere to go. He ordered his army to eat them, and a huge swarm of locusts circled in the sky. The skeletons looked up to the sky and the fight began. 2 hours later, Han Wu was already bored and said that it would be enough for a snack. A new wave came. The skeleton warriors came out of the gate again, and the protagonists began to undermine them with locusts. Looking at the crack inside which the skeletons were bathing in fire, he said that if the lava continues to accumulate, then these skeletons will not even be able to get close to him. In addition, this process can be slightly accelerated. He called out to the red orcs and ordered them to pour molten metal from the great smelter over them. They obeyed his order and walked up to the very edge of the crack, starting to pour hot metal from the barrels. Looking at the blazing fire below, the protagonist said that this was great. Now the skeletons would die immediately after they emerged from the portal. He didn't even have to do anything, he was so smart. One of the teachers asked in surprise how he came up with this. Tianwen proudly replied that it was all about proper training. Teacher Lu asked him with displeasure if he had relaxed too much. After all, it was only the 7th wave, and his disciple Lu Mo had also already reached the 7th. Meanwhile, Lu Mo stood in his sphere and looked at the enemy skeletons along with his goblin army. Behind him were 13 first-level ballista towers, 9 first-level lightning towers, and 12 fireball towers. The teachers looked at this and exclaimed in surprise. How much did he spend on all this? Lu Letian wondered who else among them, idiots, had invested as much of their students' resources? That's right, no one. Lu Mo simply had to take first place in this exam. Suddenly, one of the teachers told the others to look at Qin Shuang's sphere, and he immediately turned his gaze to the screen. In her sphere, there was a flock of elite thunder gods, consisting of 300,000 individuals, and 100 ordinary wood giants. The only structures in her sphere were 100 lightning towers. The teacher said that the daughter of the Qin family was very strong. Before, he thought that she was in the top 3 in the school, but now it seemed that she was the best. Another teacher agreed with him and said that it was useless to even compare her with others. Their colleague said that even he, a demigod, did not have as many creatures in his arsenal as she did. Lu Litian became angry because of this and began to curse Han Wu in his mind. Soon the 10th wave ended, there were 18 surviving students left. The next wave will be radically different from all the previous ones, so they need to be prepared for anything. The students prepared themselves, and from the gate into their spheres, a single monster entered. One of the teachers exclaimed in surprise that this was a hero-type creature. A bone collector appeared in front of the students, who had the skills of manipulating bones and fusing bones. As soon as he took his first steps in the sphere, he immediately found the bones and lifted them with magic, after which he took out a staff and began to spin it in the air, connecting the bones and turning them into the skeleton of a monster. The collector waved both hands and ordered the monster to go forward and kill them all, after which the bone giant rushed to attack. He slammed his hand on the ground, slapping the students' army, and then stomped his foot, causing an explosion. The teachers were worried and said that not even 3 minutes had passed, and already 8 students had dropped out. This was too difficult for them. Teacher Lu said that something was wrong. Why was the bone giant in the Han Wu realm so small? He obviously cheated somehow. Meanwhile, the bone giant in the MC realm was barely holding on to the rocks, trying not to fall into the fire. Tianwen asked, "Isn't it obvious?" This was because most of the skeleton warriors were drowned in the magma that Han Wu created. Naturally, the bone collector simply did not have enough materials to create a bone giant. At this time, the emperor entered the battle and, using the iron sword style, cut the bone giant into several pieces. The protagonist yawned widely, and the system reported that he successfully withstood the 11th wave. Teacher Lu became angry and indignantly exclaimed that he definitely cheated them somehow. He did not believe it. He must have somehow found out about the monsters that were going to appear in the exam in advance. Teacher Tian asked, "Did he have any proof of this?" He asked back, "Did he think he was covering for his student, right? Let him be careful with this, he might as well report it to the right people. It's clear without proof, everyone saw what Han Wu did to the skeleton warriors. No one in their right mind would be cleaning up the body parts of damaged monsters. Unless, of course, that someone knew that in the future there would be a bone collector who would use them." His colleague told him to stop talking nonsense, and he replied that it was not nonsense. He had reason to suspect Han Wu. The schools should look into this and give him a severe punishment. Su Mei replied that it was absolutely impossible. The principal was personally handling the monsters in the exam. Even she didn't know the details of the upcoming exam. If Han Wu really had received any information about this, then it would mean that the information had leaked from the headmaster's side. Did he really think that their powerful headmaster would make such a mistake? Lu Litian became nervous and replied that he hadn't even thought about it. Apparently, this student was just very lucky. It was just so unfair to the other students, so he became indignant. The vice headmaster looked at him with displeasure and said that he, as a demigod, should understand how absurd he had just said. Each person cultivates their own god realm as they wish. There can be no talk of any justice in this matter, only the strongest survive. If Han Wu didn't break any rules and achieve these results through his own work, then he deserved it. By the way, Do he think it would be fair for him to take advantage of his position to provide his nephew Lu Mo with resources at the expense of the other students in his class? Or is it fair for Qin Shuang, whose family spent millions to strengthen her god realm, to participate in this exam? Hearing this, Teacher Tian called him an idiot and said that now he understood why he proposed that bet to him. There is a saying, "He who digs a hole for others will fall into it himself." His disciple Han Wu had already passed the 11th wave, but his nephew had just begun. Now they would see who would win. Meanwhile, Lu Mo, who was left alone with the bone giant, said that this seemed to be his limit. He loudly announced that he gave up, and Teacher Tian said that his nephew had failed, he had won the bet. He wouldn't back out in front of so many witnesses, right? Where are his 5 divinity points? Lu Letian handed him a card and told him not to spend the points yet, he would definitely return them soon. An hour later, the 13th wave passed, 3 students remained, Han Wu, Qin Shuang, and Huang Fei. One of the teachers looked at the table and said that now they just had to figure out who would take what place. When the 14th wave came and an army of skeletons appeared in front of Huang Fei, he raised his hand and said that he surrendered. On the 16th wave, Qin Shuang also surrendered. Su Mei was very happy and said that Han Wu took first place. Meanwhile, the protagonist continued the 20th wave and was still full of strength, as were his locusts. He ordered the magma locusts to move forward, and the insects exploded upon contact with the monsters. From the bones of the fallen comrades, a bone giant rose again, but the Sword Emperor immediately attacked him, not allowing him to take a step. After 15 minutes, silence finally reigned in the realm of the gods. The system reported that the 20th wave of the invasion had been successfully repelled. The 21st wave would begin soon. The next wave would be much more difficult than the previous ones. Let him be prepared. He frowned and asked, "Another wave?" He thought the 20th would be the last. Bright sparks began to come out of the portal inside the gate, and the protagonist looked up in surprise at the monster that appeared, asking what kind of giant it was. A majestic woman appeared in front of him, sitting on a throne. Upon seeing her, the teachers exclaimed in surprise that it was the skeleton lady. MC said that he didn't expect to see a lord-type creature here. He was afraid that he wouldn't have enough strength to deal with this huge thing. He raised his hand and said that he gave up, which surprised the skeleton lady very much. She began to be pulled back into the portal and she spread her arms out to the sides, saying that she wouldn't let him leave so easily. The gate was about to pull her back in, but she continued to resist it and screamed in rage, after which she waved her hand, throwing a bone at Han Wu. It flew past him at high speed and exploded upon impact with the ground, and he turned around and exclaimed, "What the hell is going on here?" After that, the gate closed and the protagonist returned to the real world. The system reported that he took first place. Tian Wen's class scored a total of 252 points, beating another class that took second place by 20 points. Lu Lishan's class scored a total of 192 points and took 8th place. Seeing this, Teacher Lu got angry and said that he should have taken first place. His colleague looked at him with a satisfied smile, and the other teachers were very upset, and one of them said that he did not want to be fired. Everyone immediately congratulated MC on first place, and he laughed happily, saying that now all the rewards are his. An hour later, he received many cards as a reward. He received 1 unit of iron ore, land worth 100 divine power points. A level 1 sacred artifact exchange card. The first level card that the temple gives, and the divine rank weapon that can be exchanged, but the cost should not be more than 100,000 divine power points. He also received 1 elite seed, which turns ordinary creatures into elite ones. He received a divine core enhancement card and 1 divinity point, as well as 1 reproduction card. When the students saw his rewards, they were very surprised and said that this guy is now a real rich man. Meanwhile, the protagonist thought about it and said that he needed to think about how to use all this wisely. His homeroom teacher told him not to worry, he would help him choose the best options. Han Wu was happy and thought that he could be relied on. After that, he entered his god realm. The card with lands for the realm was successfully exchanged for 20 square kilometers of dense forest terrain. The sacred artifact exchange card was successfully exchanged for a first-level sacred artifact, a poisonous fog pearl. The divine core level increased by 1, and the construction of the first-level temple was also completed. He decided to use the exchange card and was presented with different options, among which was the whirlwind sword. He thought about it and said that the card could only be exchanged for one divine rank weapon. 4 swords would be enough for his hero, so he would not take the 5th for now. He needed to look for something like a hammer for the Red Orc blacksmith. He found a war hammer called Purgatory, worth 99,999 divine power points, created from the core of a Lord-type Purgatory Hydra. Minimum requirements for use: a heroic type of creature with the fire attribute. After reading the conditions, he said that he would not be able to use it right now. He would have to wait until the Red Orcs had a hero. He decided not to be upset and said that he had gotten it for free anyway. Another hour later, all the students gathered in the classroom and their homeroom teacher said that the main exam was a very difficult test, after which, in his opinion, only the strong remained. And he would like to ask the top 3 of this exam to come to the board. Han Wu, Qin Shuang and another guy came to the board, and the teacher said that Han Wu had achieved the highest result, so he would receive 100 class points. He could also choose any of the treasures provided to the class. The protagonist thought that he was now even curious about what was in the class treasury. A system window with a list of items appeared in front of him. Giant Fists, Life Spring, Iron Mine Core, Frost Rocket Level 2 Skill, Goblin Nest Level 2 Construction, and the Elite Liger Creature Type. The protagonist chose Life Spring, and his teacher thought that this was a wise choice. He did not pursue momentary strength and decided to start by developing his strengths. He had great potential. After a while, a student named Suju came to their class and congratulated the protagonist on how well he did. Let him quickly sell him the divinity point he received. He will give 105 million divine power points for it right now. Han Wu looked at him with displeasure and thought, who the hell is he to order him around like that? So he even added 5 million points on top of the normal price. There's definitely something wrong here. He asked, why does he need it? He asked back, what's the difference? Let him agree, 105 million will be his in a second. This amount is enough for him to change his main representative and change his fate. MC frowned and refused his offer, but he continued to ask him about it, saying that, to be honest, divinity is what his grandfather needs. He lacks just a little bit to become a true god. If he sells him 1 point of divinity, not only will he get millions, but he will also become his debtor. Hearing this, Han Wu thought about it. 105 million is a huge amount. With this amount of energy, he will be able to increase the number of locusts that fit in his sphere tens of times and also acquire a debtor. He was about to agree, but suddenly a message came on his phone. Qin Shuang, who apparently overheard their conversation, wrote to him that she could buy a divinity point from him for 150 million. Did he agree to this? He was very surprised by such an amount, and wondered how much money her family had. She wrote a new message in which she asked if he really thought that 1 divinity point was only worth 100 million. He should have at least done some research before starting to trade divinity. Divinity can indeed be obtained by compressing 100 million points of divine power, which is created by condensing the faith points of his beings. Such a divinity would indeed cost a little more than 100 million. Such a price is due to the fact that when another god tries to absorb this divinity, there is a chance of failure. This is all because such a divinity will have the faith of another god. Does he understand this? That is why his divinity point is worth at least 145 million, which is not available on the market at the moment. After reading this, MC thought that everything became clear to him now. It turns out that Suju was simply trying to rob him. Immediately after that, he turned to his classmate and discontentedly told him to get out of here, and he walked away saying that he cannot be arrogant just because he took first place on the exam. After that, 150 million divine power was credited to the protagonist's account, and he was very happy, saying that now he was literally swimming in money. After some time, in his realm of gods, he looked at the newly erected city and said that he thought the temple should be built in the Red Orc settlement. He built a temple there, and placed a life-giving spring in the desert, hoping that over time this land would also become fertile. The people of the Red Orcs knelt before him and thanked him with all their hearts. He placed a hammer in front of them and ordered them to raise their heads. He did not come empty-handed. He brought a divine artifact for them, the battle hammer of purgatory. He showed them the seed and said with a smile that he also brought this. He handed it to one of the orcs and said that he would bestow this elite seed upon him, which would raise his potential. He hoped that one day he would become a hero and lift this hammer. After that, he soared into the sky, and the orcs wished him a long life. The protagonist looked at the poison mist pearl in his hand and said that he listened to the teacher's advice and took it. But why does he need it? After these words, his teacher immediately contacted him and asked if he wanted to talk to him about something. He replied that he wanted to say that during today's exam, he and teacher Lu had a bet on something. In the end, he outdid his nephew and won him 5 divinity points. He decided that it would be fair to share some of the winnings with him. He showed him 2 items and said that this was a card that was worth about 150 million divinity points. He thinks that he himself understands the value of this card, so he better tell him about the second option. This is a trophy he received during the battle in the outside world. This is an egg created by the insect king himself, the heavenly demon. They have already killed it without damaging the egg itself. However, this thing, even though it is dead, can still produce a huge amount of demonic energy every day, which can eventually turn his locusts into low-level heavenly demons. From the beginning, he told him that he should prioritize cultivating his core beings, and this egg will help him do that. After listening to him, the protagonist thought that teacher Lu and the others thought of him as nothing because locusts are a very weak type of being, but teacher Tian is different. Instead of mocking him, he gave him an opportunity that will allow him to turn his low-level locusts into heavenly demon beetles. Of course, they are not comparable to Qin Shuang's natural elite thunder sparrows, but at least they will be equal to ordinary beings like goblins and orcs. The teacher told him to remember that he can choose one of these rewards. He replied with a confident smile that he would choose the egg then, and he said that he had no doubt about it. By the way, the poison attribute goes very well with demon cultivation, so he could pour the power of the poison mist pearl into his core right now. The result would definitely surprise him. Han Wu thanked him and said that he would try to live up to his expectations. After a short pause, he asked if he knew where he could buy a large amount of cheap meat. He didn't care about the quality, the main thing was the quantity. It was just that it was too expensive in ordinary stores. Tianwen was surprised and said that if he wanted to feed the locusts, he didn't advise him to buy meat in stores. It was too expensive and of little use. The director had recently taken part in a battle with an abyssal demon. There were still a huge number of demonic golem corpses lying on the battlefield, so he would ask him about it. MC thanked him and ended the call, then began to walk through the forest, thinking that the effect of the gluttony artifact was too strong. His locusts were literally sweeping away everything in their path. The power of his core was not enough to feed them. He urgently needed to find alternatives. He placed the egg at the roots of a tree and said that he thought if he placed it near a century-old tree, the process of secreting demonic energy would go faster. Perhaps it would even satisfy the hunger of his locusts a little. 2 days later, he returned to this place and saw how the egg had grown into the trunk of the tree. He said that it looked like one locust had already managed to eat its fill of demonic energy. He can't wait to see what will come out of it. He wondered how many days they develop. Suddenly, the egg cracked and he excitedly said that it was hatching. A heavenly demon beetle, a normal-type creature with a talent called cruelty, crawled out of the egg. The degree of faith fanatic gives 1 point of faith power per day. The life cycle is 200 days, 30 of which are the larval stage, 150 days the adult stage, and 20 old. The main character was delighted and said that it was hard for him to believe that this was an ordinary type. This beetle was 100 times stronger than his locust. But there was no breeding point. Apparently, beetle demons would only appear after absorbing the energy of the egg. If he understood correctly, then the energy released by the egg in 1 day would be enough to transform 200,000 locusts. Noticing that the insect had sharply doubled in size, he said that apparently the effect worked on them too. It turns out that the transformation of beetle demons into an elite form would not take much time. He decided that now it was time for him to use the pearl of poisonous fog and threw it into the air, after which the color of the insect changed, and he exclaimed in surprise, the creature had already become elite? This is a poisonous demon bull beetle. Meanwhile, the school principal looked at the huge pile of corpses in front of him in shock and wondered, how did this happen? And what should he do with this mountain of demon corpses now? Even if he manages to seal them inside card, sooner or later the divine power of it will run out, and a huge pile of corpses will once again pour out into the world. poisoning the environment. Suddenly Teacher Tian called him and asked, "Is he on some business?" He awkwardly greeted him and apologized for distracting him, but he had one question. One of his disciples would like to buy the corpses of the abyss demons from him. He asked in surprise, why does he need the corpses? He replied that he was going to use the corpses as food for his creatures. Its main representative is Locust, which at the main exam already demonstrated to them that it can eat the corpses of demons without any consequences. The principal asked, "Is this by any chance the genius who defeated the demigod a couple of days ago?" He never thought that his Locust could be so useful. It was a pity that the Locusts simply wouldn't survive in the abyss. They could have saved their divine power points and simply released his creatures right onto the scene. He handed the card to the teacher and said that there were 1,000,000 demon corpses inside, and that he should pass it on to him and say that there was no need to pay. The next day, Tianwen called him again and awkwardly said that he wanted to tell him that yesterday's demon corpses had already run out, and his student asked if he could arrange a regular supply of these corpses for him. The director was very surprised by this, and the teacher, seeing his reaction, said that he had told him that it would be too impudent of him. The director didn't let him finish and asked him to wait, after which he cleared his throat and said that he should pass it on to him, that it was a one-time action. Now they were talking about a regular supply. He can't throw his divine power points around like that, so for every 100 corpses, he'll have to give him 10,000 divine power points. 5 minutes later, the teacher called him again and told him that his student agreed and said that he wanted to start with 1,000,000 divine power points. A few days later, the locusts multiplied again and MC thought that the time had come. He sacrificed billions of lives, after which the system gave him 3 options to choose from. By choosing the first option, he can get 5 giant warriors, an elite type of creatures. The second option, 3rd level skill crystals, poisonous explosion. After fusing the crystal with its core, its creatures can master the basic technique of poisonous explosion. Also, heroic types of creatures can master this technique, raising it to the ultimate technique of poisonous explosion. The third option, disintegration mechanism. This allows you to split matter and extract pure energy. The protagonist was happy and said that these are pretty good options for sacrificing 12 billion elite creatures. Even the first option doesn't seem that bad to him. Everyone knows that giant warriors are a very formidable force. Even from one such giant, you can get at least 10 million points of divine power. Despite this, he decided to carefully study the other options and said that poisonous explosion is a perfect match for his bug demons and poisonous fog artifacts. However, right now, his 3rd level core simply won't be able to accommodate this crystal, so the second option is useless to him at the moment. He chose the third option with the thought that if he understood everything correctly, the decay mechanism will split the materials and give him energy crystals. They say that such crystals are needed for the development of creatures that rely on magic, and they are very expensive. Now he will be able to earn money without doing anything. A huge mechanism appeared in front of him, and he threw iron ore into it, and after 5 hours he took out an iron crystal from the mechanism. He took it in his hands and asked disappointedly, "Is this the crystal that is usually used in forging equipment as food for some special races?" If he remembered correctly, each of the crystals was worth 5 points of divine power. This was certainly not what he expected, but it was still good. In the long run, he could really make good money from this. Suddenly, a strange voice sounded in his head, addressing him as a great god and saying that while they were working, they were attacked by unknown undead. 3 of their workers were injured, and their leader, armed with the hammer he had given them, was trying to hold off the enemy alone. They were begging him to save their people, the Red Orcs. Han Wu was surprised and thought that it seemed like the temple was broadcasting the pleas of its creatures to him. But how did the undead get into his god realm? He frowned, using the Hawkeye skill, and then saw that the Red Orc was fighting a skeleton. Taking a closer look, he wondered why the skeleton was giving off the aura of the monster from the exam. The skeleton continued to resist the orc's attacks, and MC said with a smile that he was strong. He asked the system to give him information about him, and it reported that the identification attempt had failed. The creature was not his follower, so he could not reveal information about him. He got angry and called out to the Sword Emperor, ordering him to go there quickly. Immediately after his words, the old man appeared on the battlefield, and as soon as he noticed the skeleton, he immediately chopped it into several pieces. The bones scattered on the ground shook, and then reunited into a single skeleton. Meanwhile, the protagonist himself arrived on the battlefield and ordered the skeleton to submit to him and believe in him. Only then will he be able to reincarnate. But in response, the monster only hit him, but was unable to cause any harm. Hanwoo said that he was so naive. As long as the core of his divine realm existed, there was no way he could hurt him. He turned to his subjects and ordered them to continue chopping him up until he surrendered. 3 days later, the skeleton, along with his comrades, knelt before the deity and said that they wanted to submit to him. MC patted his head with a smile and praised him, asking, "Now he will be able to see information about him, right?" The system showed the information. It is a Lord-type creature, but at the moment it is weakened, incomplete, and sealed. Has a talent called Crystal Bones and Resurrection, faith level, devout, gives 1 million faith power points per day. A new day has come. Hanwoo returned to school and the homeroom teacher asked, "Are they ready for the next exam?" He will say it directly. This exam will greatly increase the gap between them, since the result will determine which academy they will enter. MC began to listen to him more carefully, and thought that before his death, his grandfather asked him to find his parents in the chaotic sea of stars of the Imperial Academy. From all appearances, this academy is one of the best educational institutions in this world. Tion once said that this time their test will be in Dimension C793826, the Abyss of Demons. They will receive the details of the exam immediately after they are transported there. They have his hour to prepare, so let them spend this time usefully. One of the students said that in the Abyss, everything is said to be shrouded in a demonic aura. There was a good chance that the creatures they sent would be infected with that aura and turn into uncontrollable demons. No one but demons and undead could last longer than an hour there. He had also heard that there were crazy undead wandering around there that would attack any living creature. Who even thought of holding an exam there? Another student asked if anyone had a demonic representative. He wouldn't mind working with that person as a partner. Xiaolong was very happy and thought that this was perfect for him. It was his time to shine. He would see how Hanwoo would get out of this. Suddenly, an unfamiliar number called him, and he walked out of the classroom after answering the call. Teacher Lu greeted him, and he asked in surprise if he wanted something from him. He replied that he wanted him to help him get rid of a certain person. Xiaolong asked if he was talking about Hanwoo. He didn't even have to continue. He had been planning to do that himself. Lu Lutian said that it was not for nothing that he considered him his best disciple. If he did not fail, he could count on a good reward. He pointed his finger at the creature card and said that for now he could take this small gift. He was sure that it would help him a lot in the exam. As a gift from him, Xiaolong received a demon dragon and exclaimed, "This is an elite type of creature that is not inferior in strength to heroic ones." Soon the exam began and everyone arrived in the Abyss of Demons. The conditions of the exam. First, the student can choose his incarnation and summon creatures. However, if his divine appearance dies, then the student himself will die. Secondly, they can only summon their creatures once a day. The number of summoned representatives is 100. Thirdly, the final ranking of the student will be based on the points earned on the exam tasks. The tasks themselves are listed below. The first task is to destroy the skeleton camp. A huge camp of demon golems has appeared in the Valley of Demons. Let them get rid of 90% of the demon army and destroy the banner of their camp. Hint: there are 8 to 10,000 creatures in the demon camp. Types of inhabited creatures: normal and elite. As a reward for the task, they will receive 60 points and 1 random sacred artifact of the first level. MC did not read the second task and the system asked him to choose in which incarnation of his creature he wants to appear in this dimension. He can choose to incarnate Locust, Red Orc Blacksmith, Whirlwind Sword, Skeleton Lord. The protagonist chose the fourth option thinking that it was obvious. The undead are the only type of creatures that will not be susceptible to the destructive effects of demonic aura. Streams of dark energy swirled around him and he was scared. And then he looked down and saw that he had completely turned into a skeleton. He looked around and said that the Abyss of Demons is a real paradise for the undead and demons. He pointed his finger forward and summoned 100 locusts, but they were immediately swallowed by the demonic aura. Hanwoo said that he thought so. Ordinary locusts simply would not survive here, but it was worth a try. He summoned his new demonic insects and said that he was counting on them. Moving forward through the abyss, they came across demonic fruits and he pointed his finger at them. telling the insects to collect them. While they were busy doing this, he suddenly felt someone's presence behind him and turned around to see the undead slowly walking towards them. He prepared for battle and said that he was just about to test the power of the skeleton lord. After 10 minutes, a huge pile of corpses had accumulated behind him, and he crossed his arms over his chest, saying that they were weak. At this time, his insects returned to him along with the fruits, and he said that they had collected so many things, and the system only rated it at 20 points. But he definitely doesn't intend to fight demigods for 100 points. He doesn't think he has a chance against them. Let's decide that he needs even more fruits. He ordered the insects to focus on collecting. A day later, he looked at the thick deck of cards in his hand and laughed, saying that he had cleared out all the trees with demonic fruits. Now no one would be able to complete the 49th task without his help. A plan matured in his head, and he wrote in the class chat, asking if anyone wanted to buy from him 100 demonic fruits needed to complete the 49th task. He agreed to an exchange. One of the students wrote that this was a real scam. How was this even allowed? Another student asked him what he even understood about this. It was just profitable. He would take one fruit. Now he was ready to pay 50 points of divine power. Another student said that he would also take and pay 50 points. Teacher Tian warned that they could only trade and exchange resources that they had mined in this dimension. After 3 warnings, they would be disqualified. After reading the message, he said that it was not bad. It turns out that he had obtained the universal currency of this dimension. Meanwhile, Xiaolong also read the chat and said with a smirk that he was an idiot. He didn't even have to look for him. This time, he would definitely finish him off. Taking on a demonic form, he and his pack of wolves began to wait for him. A few hours later, Han Wu noticed that everyone around him was rising in the rankings on the list. His representatives were too weak to fight strong monsters. But if he didn't start taking difficult tasks, he would very quickly end up at the bottom of the rankings. What should he do? Just then, a squad of skeletons appeared behind him. They looked up in surprise, and then the main one with bright eyes screamed. Han Wu walked up to them, surrounding himself with an aura of dark magic. He didn't know if he could subdue the local undead with the incarnation of the skeleton lord, but it was worth a try. They turned around and tensed up when he asked if they recognized him. The entire squad immediately fell to their knees and bowed. Each monster was an ordinary skeleton. They have strong bones, a strong degree of faith, giving 500 faith power per day. Han Wu was very surprised. What, it really worked. Before he could even say anything, he already had a small devout squad of skeleton warriors. He told his followers to stand up and lead him to their camp. They raised their heads and looked at him. An hour later, Han Wu stood in a dark, scary place. An entire army bowed to him, and at their head was a huge skeleton on a giant wolf. This is an elite-type skeleton knight. Talents are iron bones and summoning undead. Strong faith, gives 50,000 faith power per day. The protagonist was shocked. He happily thought that now he has a real army of the undead. The skeleton knight told his lord that he was once a member of the First Legion of Skeletons. However, after the battle with the demonic golems, his squad had to separate from the main army of skeletons. He had to establish his own camp there. The golem invasions are becoming more and more violent, so he had to send his warriors to squeak demonic fruits that can strengthen their bodies. Han Wu thought, if they are now his followers, then it really would not hurt to somehow strengthen them. The next day, Han Wu was in 178th place and continued to descend. He realized that there is no point in postponing any longer. In front of him stood a giant wolf and a skeleton knight who knelt down. Han Wu handed him a demonic fruit. He said that he would give him the fruits he had managed to collect. He should distribute it himself among his squad members. 10 minutes later, an army of evil skeletons stood in front of him. He said that their target was the lair of the demonic golems. Now they were starting. They walked forward among the rocks. Han Wu thought. The quest said that there were 8 to 10,000 creatures in the demon camp. He only had 1,000 skeletons. It would not work to go into direct conflict. He would have to act cunningly. He turned to them and told one of the skeletons to lure 10 demons to them. The skeleton stood at the entrance completely alone. Then screams were heard. A small squad of evil demons was running towards him. They stopped abruptly and were shocked. Many skeletons appeared in front of them at the same time. They began to cover themselves with their hands when the skeletons attacked and waved their weapons. Han Wu looked at the cloud of dust that covered the scene of the fight. He said it was convenient that after the demonic golems died, they could be turned into skeleton warriors. They killed enemies and built up their own army. That's why he loved the undead. In just an hour, Han Wu's skeleton army already numbered 7,000 warriors. He stood in front of the cave with his army and was very confident. He said that now there were 3,000 creatures left in the demon lair. It was time for a large-scale battle. After that, he stretched out his hand forward and shouted for everyone to go to battle. After 3 hours, the skeleton presented him with a beautiful sphere and called him his lord. The protagonist smiled and said that they did a great job. The task was completed. Han Wu received 60 points and immediately rose sharply in the ranking to 108th place. The creepy wolf felt someone's aura. Xiaolong said that this is bad. Where is this Han Wu even going? He looked at the ranking and asked in surprise, did he get 60 points? Apparently, he had cleared out the demon golem's lair. Well, he had exceeded his expectations, the bastard. But that was his last achievement in life, because he was going to die soon. There was a large army at the entrance to the lair. Xiaolong asked in surprise, skeletons. Did he secretly acquire 10 skeleton warriors? He was very cunning, wanted to use them to rank higher in the exam? He could not dream of such a thing. He shouted for his hellhounds to attack. They began to run in a pack, opening their mouths and growling loudly. When they approached, Han Wu turned around, but the skeletons blocked him. They shouted that they needed to protect the Lord and attack the hellhounds, but they also confidently and viciously attacked. Xiaolong said that this was only the second day of their stay in the demon abyss, and Han Wu had already managed to gather a large army. He asked, what will happen in a few days? Then even he will not be able to deal with him. He must kill him now. He took the form of a dragon and screamed loudly, opening his mouth. His body was enveloped in fire magic. At this time, the skeleton knight was fighting the hell dog, and Xiaolong himself approached Han Wu. He asked why Xiaolong attacked him and his creatures? If he remembered correctly, there was never any feud between them. But Xiaolong screamed angrily. He may think that he just doesn't like him and die. After that, he began to scream loudly, waving his claws, and Han Wu tried to resist the shockwave of his scream. Suddenly, a claw touched him and the excited skeletons began to call out to him. Xiaolong thought that he had already killed Han Wu and flew away, saying that he would not waste time on trash like them. The angry skeletons bared their teeth and growled, and Han Wu woke up and clutched his chest. He said it's lucky that the skeleton lord has the talent of resurrection. He ordered the skeletons not to stand still and gather all their troops. They are leaving. The protagonist frowned angrily and said that Xiaolong had decided his own fate. Their next meeting would result in his death. He, a scoundrel. After a while, Xiaolong looked at the rankings and asked, why is Han Wu still not on the list of those eliminated? He looked at the system panel in shock and screamed, this is terrible, he is not dead? He flew up and screamed that he will still kill him, even if he has to waste his precious time. When he came to his lair among the rocks, he saw emptiness. Then he ordered the demonic dogs to start searching immediately, not to miss a single undead. At this time, Han Wu stood in front of his army and raised a brightly shining crystal. He said that he would bestow them with a stone crystal. He thought that due to Xiaolong's sudden attack, he only had 5,000 skeleton warriors left. They needed to be strengthened urgently. It seemed that he would need a lot more stone crystals. His skeletons began to shine, leveling up. Han Wu looked at the system panel and said, besides, his ranking is not very good. With this result, he will never be able to enter the Imperial Academy. His task was to clear the lair of fallen demons. As a reward, he would receive 80 points, a level 2 skill crystal, a chained fireball. He said that fallen demons are the main inhabitants of the demon abyss dimension, but other than toxic fumes and some cunning, they have nothing. If they were rated at 80 points, then there should be at least 1 million of them in the lair. Well, this is excellent fodder for expanding the undead army. He told his army that they will go to the lair of fallen demons. 2 months later, the teachers gathered in the meeting room to discuss. The first teacher said that a student from his class, Huan Fei, was able to make an army of 100,000 demon goblins. He has earned 3,200 points in total and has firmly established himself in first place in the ranking of participants, which has met his expectations. As for second place, it is currently occupied by Lu Mo, who was also able to find a way to evolve his goblins into demonic ones. At the moment, he has 3,010 points, if he puts in some effort, he might even be able to compete for first place. The second teacher asked, by the way, how is teacher Tianwen's student Hanwu doing? He took first place in the exam, but now he is nowhere to be seen. Teacher Lu said displeasedly that he warned him, this guy took first place just because of luck. In his class, he was always at the very bottom, and suddenly blinded teacher Tianwen mistook him for a treasure. He turned around and said that he asks you not to forget that he is a teacher. Such words are unacceptable towards students. Mr. Lu asked, what is he doing wrong? This guy is a waste of time and resources of their school. The other disciples would become much stronger if they received the first place awards from the last exam. He thought, it was hard to say whether this boy would come out of the test alive. Teacher Tianwen bared his teeth and said, if he was so sure of it, then they would make another bet. He would bet that Hanwu would take first place again in this exam. Teacher Lu asked, what would the bets be? He decided to bet 10 divinity points. Would that be okay? He clenched his fists resolutely and said that he didn't have 10 points now. He could bet something of equal value. If teacher Tianwen agreed, then the bet would be valid. He decided to bet his level 3 divine healing. Tianwen said that they had agreed, but he wanted to say that Hanwu had recently taken on a task of 80 points. He felt that it would soon be completed. Everyone knew that only tasks that could be considered practically impossible for a high school student were valued at 80 points. If he can do this, he will ensure an invitation to a prestigious academy. His place in the rankings will not matter. Demon Abyss, Dimension C79386, the lair of fallen demons. Originally 1,000,000 demons lived in the lair, but by now there are about 100,000 left. Hanwu looked at the huge arena, standing on a cliff in front of his army. His strategy was working. Now he has over 900,000 skeleton warriors under his command. The time has come. He ordered the monsters to charge, and they began to roar angrily and jump off the cliff. The skeleton knight immediately attacked several demons. They screamed. The wounded demons looked warily at the skeleton. He asked why they didn't just surrender and hope for the mercy of their lord. 20 minutes later, Hanwu happily stood on the cliff with a huge skeleton flag. He and the skeletons shouted victory. The skeletons used the spell Divide, and the energy of the dead demons reached out to their hands. Bright magic surrounded the bodies and dried them out. The skeletons absorbed their powers and changed their shape. Now it is an elite-type skeleton resurrector. The monster has strong bones, can resurrect skeletons. A devout degree of faith gives 500 faith power per day. The protagonist asked in surprise, what? This skeleton resurrector is stronger than even his skeleton knight. Having collected the last of his energy and turned the demon into a skeleton, the resurrector roared, and the former demon woke up, becoming undead. The protagonist looked at this from above and said that this is great. All the warriors of his army are back in action. A skeleton knight came up to him from behind and knelt down, giving him a magic item, saying that this is a trophy for a respected lord. He took this artifact and looked at the system panel. This is a level 1 sacred artifact, a staff of flame. If you place this artifact in the core of the divine sphere, its main representatives can get the initial skill fireballs. The destructiveness of the skill will depend on the strength of the creatures themselves. The item can be used as a divine weapon. Hero Template Fragment, a quarter of the whole part. If you collect the entire hero template, you can get a heroic type of creatures. The source of the fallen gives the race of creatures the properties of fallen demons. Creatures gain resistance to negative effects and ignore the demonic aura of the demon abyss. The protagonist thought, the source of the fallen is a real treasure for this dimension, so later he will summon his locusts. He became more confident. Well, now he has a 1,000,000-strong army of skeleton warriors. He is not afraid of this nasty Xiaolong. He asked to show the rewards and a system window appeared in front of him. He received 80 rating points. His place is 401. He received a level 2 skill crystal chain fireball. Hanwu thought, okay, he figured this out. It seems there was another task on the list to clear the lair of the local demons. He needs to hurry. He stood on the cliff and shouted for his army to move forward. His skeletons screamed and were surrounded by dark magic. Even the sky darkened. 3 days later, the teachers looked at the system panel. The ranking was updated in real time. Hanwu completed 2 tasks for 80 and 70 points in a short time. Hanwu rose to 4th place. The teacher said, this is amazing. In just 3 days, Hanwu was able to rise from the last places to 4th. There really is a genius in teacher Tianwen's class. Mr. Lu folded his arms in dissatisfaction and said, "What difference does it make even if he has 4th place? It's not 1st place." They heard an announcement. "This is a message from the first echelon of the Fury of War. After the exam is completed, they are inviting Han Wu's disciple for an interview." A message from Hidden Dragon Academy. They invite disciple Han Wu to an interview after the exam is over. A message from 2nd Tier Green Mountain Academy. After the exam is over, they invite disciple Han Wu to enroll in their academy, without exams. Dissatisfied and surprised, Teacher Lu told Vice Principal Su that this was unthinkable. Why did she report invitations from academies only for disciple Han Wu? But she replied that there were no other messages yet. He shouted that he didn't believe it. He was only ranked 4th. How could the academies not notice 3 other disciples who were higher in the rankings? She replied that the academies had an unspoken rule. They only send invitations to those disciples who were able to score at least 3,000 points. They also had to complete one task worth 80 points. So far only Han Wu had met these requirements. Just now, the Qin Shuang student had completed the 80-point quest and scored over 3,000 points, and the War Fury Academy had sent her an invitation. He smiled and thought, he didn't care about these invitations, as long as Han Wu didn't take 1st place. He contacted Xiaolong and said that the Tianwen class only had 3 quests left. He had to get ahead of Han Wu and complete all of these quests before him, and not let him get ahead. He heard him and replied that he understood everything. He thought he could complete the 90-point quest before him. The protagonist stood on a cliff and looked at the system window with a list of impossible quests. The 100-point quest was to destroy the followers of the Dark Frog demigod. The 90-point quest was to destroy the Minotaur demon tribe. Another 90-point quest was to destroy the Dark Forest Ents. He currently has 3,480 points, ranked 3rd, and is 130 points short of 1st place. He needs to complete at least 2 tasks to win the exam, but it looks very difficult. On the other hand, he can't be considered weak either. 20 million skeleton warriors, 2 heroic creatures, and 190 elites. He has a good chance. Well, he'll deal with the demon minotaurs first. There was a huge fire explosion in the demon minotaur tribe's territory. Yang, in his werewolf form, laughed and said it was cool. Xiaolong should try harder. He doesn't want Han Wu to get ahead, does he? He told him to stop talking casually. If he wanted him to win, he wouldn't have teamed up with Yang. A giant minotaur raised its weapon above them and roared. An hour later they were still fighting and were also heavily injured. They were very scared. Xiaolong said that this was a nightmare. They had to run away, otherwise they themselves would be killed. Yang said that he agreed. If they couldn't complete the task even by uniting, then Han Wu definitely wouldn't do it. But then Yang looked up and was shocked. He asked what was this. In front of them stood an army of skeletons of different sizes, with an oppressive and scary aura. He asked where the undead came from. What should they do now? They saw that the Minotaur began to fight the skeletons. They attacked in a huge crowd. Xiaolong and Yang heard scary sounds and he said not to be afraid, although there were many skeletons, but these were ordinary skeleton warriors. They would simply break through them. The protagonist screamed from the cliff. Did they want to escape? He wouldn't let them go so easily. He ordered the bone collector to attack. A giant skeleton knight appeared in front of them. Roaring loudly, he was summoned by a skeleton in a robe. The evil monster hit the ground, and the resurrector began to read the spell again. Huyuluma. A human skeleton surrounded by magic began to fly out of the lizard's body. They screamed in fear and panic. They need to forget about the creatures. It's time for them to save their lives. A giant skeleton knight stood in front of them and told them to stand still, and the students asked what he would do with them. Han Wu stood on the skeleton's shoulder. He greeted his classmates, and the surprised Xiaolong asked Han Wu, where did he get such a powerful undead? Its main representative species was a locust. But the protagonist said that only out of politeness he would not torture and mock him, but would kill him quickly. The monster swung its huge leg to strike, and Xiaolong screamed in panic and asked to stop. Right in front of the frightened Yang's face, the monster's leg loudly hit the ground, raising dust. He said that there had never been any disagreement between them. He could apologize for this misunderstanding, but his death would do no good. Han Wu said that was true, but he couldn't let him go just like that either. Yang cried and screamed. He would give him all the treasures he had gotten from that dimension. He was just asking to let him go. Han Wu said that they had come to an agreement, and now he had to leave. Yang escaped, and 5 hours later, the protagonist stood in front of a huge mountain, defeated by the Minotaurs. The remaining warriors fell to their knees and bowed, saying that they surrendered and were ready to submit to His Excellency. He looked at the system window. He had completed the task and received 90 points. His points were now 3,570. The disciple in first place had 3,610 points. He had 2 tasks available. He thought that was great. No one had yet managed to complete the second task for 90 points. But then he saw that the task for 90 points had been completed. He asked in surprise, "What? Someone just completed one of the remaining tasks? But who could do that?" Immediately, a message appeared that Qin Shuang scored 3,580 points and rose to second place. He said that he was not surprised, which meant that he would only be able to take first place if he killed the half-god frog of darkness. He thought about it. The difficulty of this task is beyond the capabilities of ordinary students. But if he wants to attract the attention of the Imperial Academy, he simply must rise to first place. He appeared in front of 3 islands and shouted for his army to begin an invasion. The teachers said that the rest of the students had already left the dimension. Only the students of Teacher Tianwen remained there. In second place is Qin Shuang with 3,580 points, and in third place is Han Wu with 3,570 points. Teacher Tianwen said Qin Shuang, second place, Han Wu, third place, and Su Yang in seventh. What are they doing there? Mr. Lu said, dissatisfied. Just having fun, don't you understand? They only have one last task left to kill the demigod. None of these weak students dare to fight such a powerful creature. Besides, if they lose, they will lose everything. No one has ever completed this task in the history of their school. Teacher Tianwen said that this is exactly what they are going to do. Shuang and the protagonist have already gone to this demigod, and very soon they will all see what will come of it. He, unlike Mr. Lu, believes in his students. At this time, Shuang's birds were flying. Surrounded by her lightning magic, she sent them to attack the frog monster. This monster was not alone. There were also explosions everywhere. While the frogs were burning, they screamed loudly. The demigod raised his paws up. A spiral of dark magic appeared. He called her a reckless woman. After that, he activated a protective barrier. A huge dome appeared from the ground, into which lightning struck. He screamed. How dare she attack his tribe? He will kill her and all her followers. Shuang felt something was wrong. She was in the form of a bird and said that it was bad. She was attacked by strong magic. The wounded bird began to fall down. But in the air she was able to use the magic of the divine tree of purification. Shuang confidently looked forward and spread her wings and used a lightning strike that fell on the dome. After that, she created a ball of strong energy that was approaching the dome. She gathered other creatures around and told the thunder sparrows to use a lightning strike. All the birds created such balls that exuded lightning. After such a powerful strike with many balls, the dome crashed and shattered into pieces. She said that it worked. A demigod frog appeared and told his demonic toads swallowing mountains to attack. She was scared and asked what? At the same moment, the shadow of a giant toad covered her. The monster stood on its hind legs and began to attack with its long tongue. The toad managed to grab Shuang and swallow him. Inside she used her lightning and said that this is bad. The toad is too big. Her lightning does not harm the monster at all. If this continues, she will die. She saw a call from Han Wu and thought in confusion, Han Wu? He is calling at a terrible moment. She is actually dying. But then she answered. He greeted her happily and said that she looks fine. But where is she? Shuang said irritably that it is none of his business. He asked if they could team up for a while. Otherwise, in 10 minutes, there will really be nothing left of her and her sparrows. She asked why she should agree at all. But then she immediately changed her tone to a more friendly one and said, okay, but she will take the god's body for herself and give him all the rest. Is that an agreement? He replied that they had an agreement, but she must order the thunder sparrows to deliver him and his elite creatures. It so happened that he was in an incredibly remote area and could not reach the battlefield. Shuang ordered the sparrows to lead them to the swamp. Her army of birds began to fly forward, flashing lightning. Han Wu immediately saw them and said in surprise that they were very fast. He began to wave his hand and call them, and then jumped on one, ordering them to fly. He also said that they should not forget his skeletons. His army flew on huge birds to the dark swamp, where the sparrows immediately attacked the frogs. The skeletons also began to attack other monsters, but after a while Han Wu saw a mountain of bones. He thought that the skeleton warriors were too weak individually, they crumbled from the touch of a frog. But at least there were quite a lot of bones there. He said that it was time for the bone collector. After that, a resurrector appeared on the mountain of skulls and began to spread his aura. He cast a spell and ordered them to obey the god. Bones shrouded in magical smoke reached out to him. Soon a giant skeleton knight began to rise above the ground. On a swamp path, frogs were sitting in a circle and, raising their hands up, surrounded themselves with a magical protective circle. A skeleton knight broke through to them and began to destroy everything with his feet, raising dust and trees. The protagonist concentrated and ordered the skeleton resurrector, the Minotaur shaman, to attack. A huge bull and a skeleton ran in that direction. The Minotaur powerfully hit the ground with his hammer. The frogs began to fly away from the blow and scream. The resurrector glowed with a dark aura and ordered the dead to come out of the frogs' bodies and unite. Human skeletons flew up from the corpses. They were surrounded by dark magic, and a new squad of frog warriors stood in front of them. Thunder sparrows attacked from above and incinerated the monsters with their lightning. The demigod said that he underestimated them. He would have to become a little more serious. He crossed his arms. Streams of dark magic appeared around him. Han Wu flew high above the swamp. He thought it was a terrifying spell. The monster instantly killed all his skeleton warriors. What to do now? He gathered all his creatures, but victory was still too far away. Suddenly, he heard Jianfeng and was surprised. He told the respected god that he wanted to fight. The other monsters said they wanted it too. He happily asked, "Is this the wind sword and his red orc blacksmiths?" The protagonist frowned and said that they were in time. If the new followers can't cope, then he will have to use the power of the old ones. A huge portal in the form of a gate appeared, from which there was a bright glow. The wind sword came out and prepared all his swords. He was at the head of the orc army. They began to run to attack and shout that they would destroy them. Another bright portal appeared in the sky, from which many explosive and magma locusts flew out. They said that they made their choice. He can sacrifice them to win. Han Wu was surprised, but then he made up his mind and began the sacrifice. The whirlwind took away the monsters' lives. He looked at the system panel and said, it was unexpected that the reward would be so useful. Was the heavens really watching over him? He received the sacred flame of hope, a special item that dispels the darkness, negative effects on creatures. The item strengthens his creatures, a gift from the creatures whose lives he sacrificed. Han Wu took a large torch and said, the sacred flame of hope shall dispel the darkness in his path. The frog monsters were surprised and began to worry, and he smirked and said that their time had come. The shocked demigod asked, how is this possible? How could some pathetic artifact dispel his dark spell? He does not believe it. Han Wu flew over the swamp and his torch shone brightly, dispelling the darkness and magic. The frogs screamed as dark magic came out of them as well. He approached the monster. It seemed that this toad swallowed Shuang. The protagonist said that it was necessary to quickly defeat this toad swallowing mountains. Jianfeng and the orc jumped out of the portal in the sky, saying that they obeyed the master. They began to inflict slashing blows on the frog with a sword, and the orc also hit him with his large hammer. The monster screamed, and when the toad's stomach was badly wounded, Shuang flew out and the demon looked up. She quickly created a ball of strong magic and attacked. The toad was in the very center of the explosion. Everything around was in dust and lightning. Shuang with an army of sparrows and the orcs Han Wu were approaching the monster at the same time. Nothing could be seen at that place because of the huge fiery explosion. The skeleton knight crushed the rest of the frog monsters with his giant legs. The demigod said that he would kill these impudent scoundrels, but he failed to use dark magic. He turned around and asked, "What?" Han Wu flew behind him with a torch, which easily dispelled his magic, and Shuang attacked from above, burning the monster with lightning. The demigod fell to the ground and dark smoke came from him. They happily flew. Shuang repeated that she only wanted the body of the demigod, and he would take the rest for himself. The protagonist and Jianfeng approached the frog. He said that he would give them everything he had in exchange for his life. Han Wu folded his arms in displeasure and said that after he died, Everything that was his would go to him. The demigod began to worry, and Jianfeng raised his sword, then brought it down hard on the frog. After 30 minutes, they stood in front of a giant mountain of treasures. Shuang told him not to worry, she would not take his loot. He asked, is she sure? She could take a few artifacts. But Shuang refused and said that she was good at keeping her promises, everything except that Toad's body was his. He put the crown on her head and said, okay, she can count this as interest on the debt. Shuang blushed and turned away, proudly saying that she would accept it then. Teacher Tianwen contacted him and said that they had done a great job. The management of their school and representatives from some academies wanted to meet him after he returned. He was surprised, and the teacher said that he would collect the bones of his skeletons himself. He did not have to worry. They walked along the corridor. Tianwen asked them to be very polite. All these people were true gods. They should not be trifled with. They entered the office and saw a long table with various representatives from the academies. Han Wu wondered if these true gods would notice his unique talent and ability to sacrifice his life. The man said they will start with Shuang. She is a descendant of a very influential true god family, right? Also, in this exam, she received the body of a demigod. If he understood everything correctly, then she plans to use it to create a lord-type creature. How many divinity points does she have at the moment? The teacher looked at him in surprise and thought, Shuang is going to create a lord-type creature without even becoming a demigod. This is an incredible result. Even they, the school leadership, being demigods, could not get close to such creatures after years of effort. Shuang replied that this is true, she has 4 divinity points. The protagonist looked at her in surprise and thought, 4 points? Her family had to spend at least 450 million divine power. Such amounts he cannot even imagine. The satisfied representative of the academy said, in that case, he wants to please her. She fully meets all the requirements of their 3 academies. As soon as she creates a lord, she can immediately apply to any of the academies. She would be informed in advance of all the details of the training in the academy she had chosen. Shuang thanked him. Then the man frowned and said, now her classmate Han Wu. They had looked at his results. His main representatives are locusts, right? He confirmed this, and the teacher drew a cross in the column of the representative of the god realm. He asked, at the moment he possessed 1 point of divinity, right? He said that was correct. Then the teacher put a cross in the column of the amount of divinity. The teacher said that they had one last question left. They were very interested in this. How did he obtain a heroic creature of the Wind Sword Emperor type? And also, although weakened, but still the incarnation of the Skeleton Lord? Han Wu thought, apparently they do not know about his unique ability. Then he has no reason to reveal this information. He asked if he could not answer this question. The teacher answered yes, but then he would have to disappoint him, although he took first place in the last 2 exams, but he does not meet the other requirements. If he wants to enter one of their 3 academies, he must maintain this primacy in the entrance exams. The deputy director was upset and said that she was sorry, but she repented that the representatives of the academies did not appreciate his outstanding achievements. The protagonist looked at her confidently and asked her not to be upset. He would show himself in the entrance exams. The teacher from the academy wished him luck and waved his hand. Tianwen took him by the shoulder and said that he admitted that the top academies have high requirements, and it was normal if he could not enter. But he should remember that he had invitations from second-class academies. Han Wu replied that he did not need it. He wanted to enter the Imperial Academy. He left the office, and Shuang was already waiting for him. She asked, did he hear? After she creates a lord-type creature in her realm, she will be able to enter the preparatory course of one of the best academies. He probably understands himself that there will be much more resources for development there. And he wants to go to the Imperial Academy? The protagonist replied that it was true. He was sure that he would enter. He thought that he had to fulfill his grandfather's last wish and find his parents. Shuang blushed with embarrassment and said that she also wanted to enter. She had already made her choice a long time ago. Well, there was still a long time before the entrance exams, and she would be entering the preparatory course of the Imperial Academy soon. By the time he entered, he would no longer be able to compare with her. So now, while she was busy with the Lord, he had a chance to become her slave. He should think about it. He replied that he was doing well without her, too. She had seen his results herself. He saw no point in becoming her slave. Well, he needed to sort out the trophies. He would go. Shuang blushed even more and told him to think about it. She thought he was a fool, but his small skeleton form looked cute. In the realm of gods, Han Wu was beautiful as always. He took out a card that exuded strong streams of magic. He used divine card absorption, then an information panel appeared in front of him. Now he has 2 divinity points, 3.5 million divine power points of his own production, 76 million production of other creatures. He also has 79 million faith power, level 3 God realm, level 2 faulty artifact gluttony, level 1 sacred artifact poisonous fog. The representative of the God realm is Locust, 219 super elite creatures, 49 million elite creatures, 2 billion ordinary creatures. He also has other representatives, a heroic type creature, the Emperor of the Wind Sword. Heroic type Orc, God Hammer. There are also 2 super elite type creatures, 58 elite type creatures. He has a Skeleton Lord, 2 heroic type creatures, Bone Collector and Skeleton Resurrector. In the sphere, there are also 190 Bull Demon Shaman creatures, 14 super elite type creatures, 2,589 elite type creatures. He has buildings, a smelter of the 1st level, insect nests of the 2nd level, a temple of the 1st level. In the sphere there is a life-giving source, a decay mechanism, a flame of hope. He looked at the types of creatures and grinned, saying that he could buy equipment for his strong creatures with all the money. But the first task is the evolution of his main representative, the Locust. To begin with, he decided to use the source of the fallen. Streams of magic appeared in his hand, and then insects flew in front of him. He said that now they are more tenacious, stronger, and have great resistance to negative effects. They also have a complete disregard for demonic aura. Well, that's what he will call them, fallen locusts. Another army of locusts was shrouded in black magic. They flew to the dark heart among these streams. He said that he will strengthen the second group with the dark magic of that frog's heart. A locust monster appeared in front of him. Han Wu said that they can now fly stealthily and impose various negative effects on opponents. Then he will call them damned locusts. He heard that the orcs were asking the magnanimous god for forgiveness because their representative dropped a sacred relic there while working with ore and the decay mechanism. They were asking for forgiveness. The protagonist became worried and said, "What artifact? We need to check everything." He immediately ran to that place. The god's hammer and his younger brother were kneeling in front of him. The orc was worried and said that he was asking him for forgiveness, asking to spare their lives and this loser who damaged the artifact. Han Wu went down to them. He felt awkward. He was forgiving them for the first time, but this should be a lesson to them. Suddenly, flames gushed out of the furnace. Han Wu saw several items at once, 2 flame crystals, a gold crystal. There was also a source of a sacred artifact that could be used to improve and repair sacred artifacts. Han Wu was surprised and asked, "Is this for repair? If gluttony was faulty, then can it be repaired?" He connected gluttony and the source of a sacred artifact. A bright light enveloped the space. Now ordinary creatures can evolve into elite ones after fully restoring their energy 999 times. The protagonist said what? He saw that this indicator was 1,000 before, but now it is 1 less. So if he improves gluttony, he will be able to completely repair the item and use all the power? But this will require 1,000 sacred artifacts. Where can he get that many? He looked at the system panel and began to search for information on the internet. He wrote that he needed help. He has divine equipment, which is also a sacred artifact. He found it during the battle on the outer front, but it turned out to be faulty. Does anyone know how to repair such a thing? Of course, he will give a reward. In the comments, people wrote that it is better to give up, it is useless, someone has already tried to repair such an item, it is a waste of money and time. Han Wu asked, so there is no other choice? He will have to slowly fill this scale himself. But then he saw that someone had replied, maybe he could be helped, they could chat in person. Then Han Wu decided to write to the user. At that moment, the system window showed a call screen. The protagonist looked at it in surprise and asked, so quickly? The person on the other side of the call asked, could he really help him repair his divine weapon? Han Wu replied, he would not give him 100% guarantee. But his post had been lying on the forum for a long time, so he had no choice but to try his method. If he wanted to try, then let him send him a couple of sacred artifacts that he did not really need. The person replied, he would warn him right away, He had a divine application from the anti-fraud organization, so he should not even try to deceive him. What sacred artifacts does he need? If below the 4th level, he will give it to him right away, and if higher, it will take some time. The protagonist thought, higher than the 4th level? Yes, this person is incredibly rich. He said the 1st level is enough. At the same moment, a package fell from the sky for Hanwoo, who fell to the ground and screamed, "Wow! He got so many artifacts so quickly." The protagonist said in surprise, "Holy heavens, there are over 100 sacred artifacts there. Maybe I should just disconnect from the connection and run away?" Hanwoo put his hand to his head and imagining the image of the person said, "No, it's better not to risk it. What if the anti-fraud representatives really show up?" He got to work and threw gold stones into the stove. A bright fire burst out and the work began. 2 hours later, a large number of repaired artifacts lay on the ground. This is a sacred artifact source with 109 units. The protagonist looked at the system window, where it was written, "Sacred artifact source of 100 units, send." He said that you need to pay for the help, so he will keep 9 sources for himself. He doesn't think he will notice. Hanwoo pressed the send button. At the same moment, the man called him and joyfully screamed, "Master, he is his real savior." He asks him to help him, Yuanzhong, and in the divine realm, this is very important. The protagonist pointed to his ears and thought, Yuanzhong? A hostile race. He laughed and thought, this name suits him. Hanwoo smiled and replied, "These are 2 big words. It was not a burden to him, so he will try to help." Explanation: Yuanzhong is consonant with Yuanzhou, so all the differences in the different stress, which cannot be explained. But it is translated as a hostile race. After a while, Teacher Tian was sitting in the room and forming a flow of energy. He remembered how Teacher Lu said, "Here, let him keep his sacred artifact of healing the 3rd level." He frowned and said, "But do not rush to sell it, Teacher Tian. Perhaps he will have to return it to him soon." At present, a call from Hanwoo appeared on Teacher Tian's screen. Teacher answered and said, "A very unexpected call." "Something happened, Hanwoo?" The protagonist greeted Teacher Tian and said, "No, nothing happened. He just wanted to know if he knew a way to get the resources needed to increase the core of the God realm." He searched the internet, but found nothing. Teacher Tian replied, and it is not surprising that he did not find anything. Such rare resources as divinity, divine core fragments, and so on are bought up almost instantly by large corporations. Ordinary people do not have a turn there. He said that if he helps him defeat Lu Letian, he will share some of his collection with him. The protagonist replied, "Okay, thank you, Teacher Tian." The teacher said, "In fact, there is another way, but he may not like it." Once, he also got his hands on several high-level sacred artifacts, which he simply could not use due to the low level of the core. Then one of his well-connected seniors brought him to a place called the Bloody Arena. The organizers of these games reward the winner of the arena with a fragment of the divine core. But this is a very dangerous undertaking. All sorts of people gather in this arena, and sometimes even representatives of other civilizations drop in. There is a high chance of losing a huge number of your representatives and rolling back your progress far. Let him think carefully before making his choice. Hanwoo looked at the system window and thought, he had just spent a huge amount of resources on improving his representatives and wanted to check their current strength. This is a great opportunity. He replied, "It is not a problem, Teacher Tian. He needs resources, and he already has more than enough locusts." The next day in the Bloody Arena, the protagonist looked around and said, "Wow, the scale of this place is really amazing." Teacher Tian handed him a mask and told him to hold on. This mask will hide his personal information from the demigods and divine beings. After all, this is the outside world, so you should be careful there. They walked up to the table and the representative asked him to fill out this registration form. Teacher Tian folded his arms and said, "The battles here are divided into 3 types: between divine beings, between demigods, and between true gods. Unless the participants themselves ask for it, then battles between participants of different levels are not held. There is no limit to the number of creatures used, but you can admit defeat only if you lose at least 50% of all your creatures. But especially stubborn participants can resist until they lose absolutely all of their representatives." A system window appeared in front of the protagonist, informing them that they have selected an opponent for him. Let him prepare to move. Han-woo asked, already? At that moment, he began to be sucked into the portal and he asked fearfully, where is he being transferred? He was transferred to another space and a man appeared in front of the protagonist who said, hey, youngster, although he cannot read information about him, he does not need this to understand that he is still a beginner. The guy pointed at himself and said not to worry, the rat uncle takes great care of the newbies, so he will lose quickly and almost painlessly. The people in the stands were surprised, this guy is still very green. Is this his first fight? Poor guy, in his first fight he will have to face the ruthless rats of this scumbag. Come on, everyone has to go through this. This flower, who was raised in greenhouse conditions, just needs to understand the cruel rules of the outer worlds. Han-woo frowned and thought, judging by the chatter of the audience, this rat is a very difficult opponent. The system window asked to call his creatures. The fight will begin in 3 minutes. The rat raised his hand and laughed. He was sure that he had never seen so many creatures from the enemy. He understands his confusion, young man, so he offers to surrender without resistance. He promises that he will let him go right after he destroys all his representatives. The rats approached him and he laughed. The protagonist sent his insects forward and asked, is he trying to scare him with his numbers? Rat laughed and asked, is he comparing his pathetic locusts with his rats? Let him not fool around, little boy, just surrender, and Uncle Rat will definitely take care of him. The system window reported the start of the battle. Rat shouted, Ratmen, to the gun. These ones pulled the arrows and fired them upward. The protagonist frowned and ordered the fallen locusts to provide protection. The sharp arrows pierced the insects' wings and nailed them to the wall. Rat shouted, let them not stop, but continue shooting further. Han-woo screamed, it's the turn of these damned locusts, let them disorient the enemy. At this moment, the insects moved forward and distracted the rats, and the protagonist shouted, and now they, the heavenly demon beetles, let them kill all of these. The insects released their stingers towards the rats and a voice rang out, this is a crushing defeat for the rat. The scoreboard showed the score, Han-woo, 99% of the surviving creatures. Rat Clan, 22% of the surviving creatures. The rat stretched out his hand and shouted, stop, let him stop, enough. He doesn't want to continue the fight anymore, he surrenders. In the arena, there was a huge pile of rat corpses, above which a bright crystal was shining. Han-woo looked at it and said, a fragment of the divine core. He touched it and said, suspiciously similar to his ability to sacrifice life. The voice said that the fight was over and the winner was Han-woo. Let him prepare to move to the waiting area. Teacher Tian put his hand on his shoulder and said, you did well, Han-woo. Such a confident victory, even though it was his first fight. He must be happy to have received such a coveted reward, huh? The protagonist adjusted his mask, and the teacher said since he hadn't lost even 1% of his creatures, he was probably eager to clash with the next opponent in the arena. He would say right away, if he won the second one, he would get a core fragment 10% larger than the previous one. Han-woo smiled and said, then continue. He needs a lot of fragments. 32 days later, the protagonist said he won again, but lost about 100 million of his elite and even super elite locusts. He looked at the crystals of different sizes and said, but how many divine core fragments did he get for 89 victories? At the moment, he could easily upgrade his core to level 7. The protagonist thought about it, but with each level, the requirements for upgrading become greater. To reach level 8, he would need more fragments than for upgrading all the previous levels combined. Teacher Tian said he wanted to say that with the current strength of his creatures, he could even compete with some demigod. Han-woo looked at him and asked, but would he get more fragments as a reward if he challenged such a formidable opponent? Teacher Tian replied, of course, for defeating a demigod, he would get a reward 10 times greater than what he had previously received. And since he had won 89 times, all of this would be multiplied, giving him a fragment 90 times greater than a normal core fragment for defeating a demigod. The protagonist looked down and thought. The guy handed him an application form for an inter-rank battle. He asked, is he really sure of his choice? It is very risky. Han-woo replied, yes, he is sure. At this moment, the people on the platform began to talk. The brat got cocky. He had heard about this brat, who had been in the arena for over 30 days, and apparently it went to his head, since he challenged the demigods. Let him be shown his place, he bets on the demigod. The guy looked away and said, demigods have a completely different level of divine core, can use high-level sacred artifacts, and have many divine spells. What was he thinking when he agreed to this? The spectator replied, he thinks it's his overconfidence. He checked his statistics. In all this time he lost only 3 times. Apparently, this was the basis for his groundless overconfidence. Teacher Tian looked at Han Wu and said, he knows people don't really believe in him. The odds are 1 to 100. The protagonist replied, Teacher Tian, he himself cannot bet, but asks him to bet 10 million points of divine power on him. Teacher Tian laughed and said, and he does not doubt himself at all. Okay, he will bet another 5 million on him and his own money, so that it will be more interesting to watch. In case of his victory, he promises to buy some divine weapon. Han Wu smiled and thanked the teacher. He frowned and said, although this did not add much motivation to him. He was already looking forward to this battle. The protagonist took off his mask and thought, he has not yet added a single sacred artifact after upgrading the core. Where to start? He moved to his god realm and standing on the mountain said, he does not think that gluttony or poison will somehow help him in the upcoming battle. At this moment, a call came to his system window, respected master, has he already taken out today's portion of sacred artifact sources? Han Wu frowned and asked, by the way, he said that he could get artifacts up to the 4th level, right? Yuan Zhong replied, yes, master, his god realm has a whole bunch of sacred artifacts from the 1st to the 3rd level. If he needs any of them, he can just say so. The protagonist frowned and said, well then, he will not refuse. He needs powerful sacred artifacts of the 2nd level, preferably with the attributes of poison, earth, darkness, and fire. At the same time, a huge package fell next to him. Han Wu screamed, this guy is incredibly rich. 2nd level sacred artifact, magma sphere. It carries the power of the fire and earth attributes. Increases the defense and resistance of creatures, and also accelerates the recovery of this. 2nd level sacred artifact, shadow nail. It carries the power of the darkness attribute. After absorbing the artifact into the divine core, divine realm creatures can obtain the skill shadow nail. The shadow nail fixes the target's shadow in one place, preventing it from moving. Han Wu read this and said thoughtfully, it's quite suitable for the fallen locust and the cursed locust. It should be used. The 2 artifacts hung in the air next to each other. A bright beam illuminated the surroundings and the protagonist pointed forward. The huge insects moved forward and Han Wu said, great, his locusts have successfully evolved. Now the upcoming battle doesn't seem so hopeless anymore. The system window reported, participants, please return to the arena to begin the battle. The protagonist pushed off the ground and headed upward. The spectators shouted loudly, Mammoth Lord, let him crush him. Let him show him what mighty demigods are capable of, Lord. Locusts, let them hold out for at least 3 seconds, otherwise he will lose the bet. Xiang Meng stood in the arena, folding his arms and saying, he never thought he would be so lucky. Show the arrogant newcomer his place and earn some good money at the same time, this is a real gift from heaven. Well, young man, is he ready to part with all his creatures? He is amazed by his courage, but this should not be confused with feeble-mindedness. Today he will show how terrible a demigod can be in anger. The protagonist looked at him and said, what a talkative man he is. Xiang Meng shouted, let his glorious legion of mammoths show themselves. Huge mammoths appeared behind him, and he raised his hand up. The spectators loudly demanded to crush him. The Lord of Mammoths, let him crush him. These are giants, it's breathtaking. Xiang Ming climbed onto the head of the giant thunder mammoth and said, now it's his turn, young man. Let him try to at least amuse him a little. Han Wu stretched out his hand and shouted, forward, swarm. Poisonous sky demon beetle, raised from demon eggs in a nest using poisonous fog and gluttony. Magma fallen locust, raised in a nest using gluttony and a magma sphere. Shadow curse locust, raised in a nest using gluttony, dark curses, and a shadow nail. Xiang Meng frowned and said, not bad for a beginner. He can't wait to get started. He shouted, forward, his legion. The protagonist waved his hand and shouted, shadow cursed locusts, their turn. The insects moved forward and released their stingers. It pierced near the mammoth and the audience shouted, let them see, the mammoth just froze. What kind of ability is this? It hit the shadow, but it affected the body. I've never seen anything like this. Han Wu shouted, "Poisonous sky demon beetles, now they are." Their poisonous stings pierced the mammoth's forehead, and Xiang Ming laughed and said, "It's all useless, a youngster, let him just put up with it." Yes, he was able to stop his thunder mammoth, but what's the point? His locusts, even if they are super elite, can't even scratch his giant. Han Wu frowned and asked, "Is he so sure about this?" Bright explosions rang out in front of the mammoths. Xiang Ming thought with displeasure, horror, he didn't expect this. Does that mean he's trying to take out his strongest creature with the number of his suicide bombers? It won't work. He shouted, "Let them protect the thunder mammoth, everyone to him." The mammoths moved forward and Xiang Ming shouted, "Let them stop these." Bright flashes of explosions appeared next to the mammoth. Xiang Ming used beast magic, thick skin, blood aura and healing. The mammoths lay down on the soft floor and raised their trunks. The insects crashed into these and exploded. Xiang Ming folded his arms across his chest and said, "The fact that he forced him to use his magic already says a lot. Therefore, he offers him to surrender, in which case he will leave exactly half of his creatures alive." The protagonist frowned and asked, "Surrender? Why did he assume that he had already lost?" He screamed, "Surrender is not in his rules." Han Wu waved his hand and shouted, "Forward, his demon minotaurs." Huge creatures came out from behind him. These moved forward and screamed loudly. Xiang Ming asked in fear, "Where did he even get the demon minotaurs?" The creature grabbed a pipe and hit the mammoth on the head. At that moment, a large portal appeared, from which skeletons began to emerge. The protagonist screamed, "Skeletons, their exit." The Lord of Skeletons sat on the large throne, and next to him stood the Resurrector of Skeletons and the Collector of Bones. Han Wu sat down next to the Lord and said, "Resurrectionist, he is counting on him." At this moment, the Lord frowned, and the Resurrectionist rushed forward. It swung its staff and struck the dead mammoth. Xiang Ming cried out in displeasure, "Terrible skeletons, they are resurrecting his creatures. Don't let him think that a demigod is so easy to break." He shouted, "Giant war mammoth, let him activate his war stomp ability." The mammoths rushed forward and began to smash the bodies of the skeletons. Xiang Ming shouted, "Yes, Lord, let him crush this overfed brat, trample him." The protagonist waved his hand and shouted, "Demon minotaurs, get back. Collector, he knows what to do." It stepped forward and stomped its foot and began to collect all the parts of the skeletons. Xiang Ming looked up in fear and asked, "Heroic type of creature? And such a strong one at that." Xiang Ming put his hand forward and said, "Gigantism." The mammoth instantly grew in size and screamed loudly. The collector got angry and grabbed the mammoth by the horns, opened his mouth and spun its body. It dropped the monster and rushed forward, swinging its fist. The elephant's trunk wrapped around the skeleton's hand and hit the ground. It jumped up and screamed loudly. The collector rushed forward and swung his arm and began to strike the mammoth. The protagonist screamed, "Now, let him finish this." The collector continued to strike and grabbed the horn, pulled it out. Xiang Ming screamed in fear, "No! Let him not give up, but get up!" The collector grabbed the second horn and tore it off. Tears flowed from the mammoth's eyes. Han Wu looked at the skeleton and said, "Wow, it was not for nothing that he ordered the collector to learn the art of close combat. But this exceeded all his expectations." The mammoth jumped up and swung its trunk and rushed towards the man. Xiang Ming shouted, "Giant mammoths, let them all attack together, surround and wear him out." The collector became huge again, and mammoths rushed towards him. It swung its leg and threw the monsters aside. The collector swung its leg and threw back several more mammoths. It began to strike with its fists, and then with its knees. The mammoth approached the collector and hit him with its horns. These began to climb up his body, and Xiang Ming ordered to crush him until the collector himself appears. And they will not dare to let this one get away. Han Wu waved his hand and shouted, "Demon minotaurs, let them cover the collector. Help this one break free." The minotaurs rushed at the mammoths and began to strike them. The collector grabbed his robe and screamed loudly. The mammoth skeletons began to rise. These stopped in front of the mammoths, and the battle began. Suddenly a voice rang out, "This can't be. Let them just look, the demigod only has a tenth of all these creatures left." The invasion of the evolved locusts was too deadly. The newcomer actually defeated the demigod. Xiang Ming knelt down and said, "He surrenders." At this moment, energy began to emerge from the mammoth's bodies. It gathered into a large crystal and fell into Han Wu's hand. He thought, the fragment of the divine core for defeating the demigod will be bigger. At this moment, a voice behind him said, Mr. Han Wu, the leadership of their blood arena invites him to a meeting. Energy began to accumulate near the protagonist's body. He was transferred to a new location and the voice said, do not worry, the leadership of the blood arena, will not harm him. Han Wu asked, is that so? And what did they want from him? The voice said they closely watched the progress of his performance and noticed a couple of his tricks. But this does not change the fact that he was really able to defeat an opponent who was a rank higher than him. He proved to them that he is worthy of becoming the heir of the blood arena. The blood arena was originally conceived as a place to identify the owner's opponent. Anyone who could defeat an opponent who was head and shoulders above him in strength would be honored to become this very heir. So Han Wu, is he willing to accept this role? Han Wu asked in surprise, to become the heir? He thought about it. A huge number of people flock there every day, and other races too. He couldn't even imagine how much the management made from this. And now he was being asked to become the heir to all this wealth? There was clearly something fishy there. Han Wu exhaled and said before making a decision, he needed to know how many heirs there were in the blood arena, as well as understand what benefits and responsibilities this status entailed. A systemic image of a person appeared next to him and said, he surprised them, Mr. Han Wu. Not everyone could detach themselves from thoughts of huge money like that. Since they asked with good intentions, they would explain everything to them. At the moment, the blood arena has 349 heirs. Of these, 221 are divine beings, 118 demigods, 9 true gods and 1 supreme god. Becoming the heir, he will receive the eternal coordinates of the blood arena. Also, without any artifact, they will be able to teleport to any of the worlds associated with the bloody arena. Naturally, you will have to pay for this. 1 million points of divine power. The system man said that along with this, he will receive permission to build his own arena inside his divine sphere to train and support the evolution of his creatures. It spread its arms in different directions and said, and with the responsibilities, everything is simple. As soon as there are 500 heirs, then the struggle for the title of the true heir will begin. The fights will take place in the bloodiest arena. The true heir, as expected, will inherit the arena. Participation in the inheritance is mandatory. The main character thought, given the customs of the arena and the creatures that come there, this inheritance will be a test. For the right to possess such a treasure, the contenders will be ready to fight to the last drop of blood of their creatures. But now there are only 349 contenders, he will become 350, and all 500 are needed. Perhaps by the time the required amount is collected, he will have already become a supreme god. The system man asked, so does he agree? Han Wu replied, yes. The system window reported, congratulations, now he is the 350th heir of the bloody arena. Suddenly, an energy flow pierced the protagonist's body and he looked forward in fear. He was transferred to another room and Teacher Tian said, Han Wu, he himself is a real treasure. Now they are both rich. The protagonist looked at him puzzled. Teacher Tian put the phone in his hand and told him to hold it. The protagonist looked at the screen in surprise and wondered where so many zeros came from. 1 billion? Teacher Tian looked at him and said, Han Wu, let me warn you, spending 1 billion is not as difficult as he thinks. He advises him to buy strong artifacts first. The protagonist spread his arms in different directions and asked, strong artifacts? Teacher, he is still only a divine being, so he is not sure if he can use any really strong artifact. Teacher pointed at himself and told him not to worry so much. Teacher will take care of everything himself. He knows one store where they will definitely be able to pick out a suitable artifact for him. The protagonist thought about it. In fact, he was planning to do this himself. What a lucky coincidence. Suddenly, Mian Ming ran into the room and shouted loudly, Locust Guy, he finally found him. Han Wu hid behind Teacher Tian and shouted, Teacher, let him help. Teacher spread his arms out in different directions and shouted displeasedly, as long as he is around, no one will dare to harm his disciple. Xiang Ming stopped in front of them and waved his hands and said they misunderstood him. He did not even think of taking revenge on him. He stretched out his hand and said, he was looking for him only to establish friendly relations with him, since he considers him a capable guy. His name is Xiangmeng, a freshman at the Imperial Academy. The protagonist walked towards him and shook his hand and asked, "A freshman at the Imperial Academy?" Now it makes sense why he is so strong. Xiangmeng thinks he is still a schoolboy. Which academy is he thinking of applying to? Has he already passed the entrance exam? Hanwoo adjusted his hair and replied, "No, in fact, he has not entered any entrance course yet. An ordinary high school student." Xiangmei's eyes widened and asked, "What?" He poked the protagonist with his finger and asked, "Is he making fun of him?" "This is simply impossible." Hanwoo pointed his finger back and asked, "Why would he lie to him? By the way, his teacher can confirm everything." Teacher Tian cleared his throat and said, "He told the truth." True, he was invited by many universities, but he decided to enroll in the Imperial Academy. However, the representative of this academy was not interested in his candidacy. Xiangmeng replied, "I see. And he has a keen eye. The Imperial Academy is the most powerful among the 3 higher academies." He put his hand on the protagonist's shoulder and said that he himself was convinced of his considerable abilities, so he hoped that he would still be able to become his junior. He would definitely inform the academy about his very promising candidacy. Xiangmeng thought that the leadership would still want to test him. When he returned, he should not waste time, immediately start pumping up his main representatives. Let him take full advantage of the given chance. Hanwoo asked in surprise, would he really help him? Xiangmeng turned around and laughed. Of course, he has potential. The path to becoming a real god is long and thorny, and only loyal comrades whom he trusts can make it a little easier. Xiangmeng raised his finger up and added, in addition, the academy will give him a bonus in the form of resources if the candidate he proposed passes the test. You can't refuse free gifts, right? The protagonist put his fist to his palm and thanked him, Brother Meng. Xiangmeng went forward and answered, now everything depends only on him. He advises him to focus on breeding the hero of his main representatives. This will make his task much easier. Although one should not underestimate the trials of the Imperial Academy, good luck. After a while, on one Bailey Street, Hanwoo and the teacher came to an artifact store. The protagonist read the inscription on the signboard and thought, what a banal name. Teacher Tian pushed the door and told them to go already. At the entrance, they were met by a girl who smiled and said, welcome to their artifact store. What level of artifacts are they interested in? Or do they want to meet the forging master right away? After a while, the girl went forward and said to contact Master Nign and tell him that Mr. Tian has arrived. Hanwoo thought about it. The teacher did not even consider the assortment. Is this master really that good? The girl pointed to the portal and asked their gentleman. The protagonist exchanged glances with the teacher, and they stepped inside. Hanwoo came out of the portal and looked at the standing Master Tony. He said he hopes that he has not come empty-handed, Tian. The protagonist thought fearfully, maybe it is not too late to get out of there? Teacher Tian cleared his throat and pointed his hand and said, Master Tony, in general, this is his disciple. The master scratched his bald head and asked, Old man Tian's disciple then? Okay, then first he will explain to him the rules of his store. Everyone is welcome there, but he does not have discounts for disciples and students. The protagonist frowned and thought, is he serious? Any other store would have at least a minimal discount for disciples. In fact, it is not so easy for them, disciples, to earn this money. He was able to save 1 billion only through hard work and a bit of luck. Teacher Tian pointed his hand forward and said, Hanwoo, Master Tony has a sharp tongue, but his heart is kind. In addition, he creates really high-quality artifacts. Master Tony smiled and said, Old man Tian, he didn't know that he could talk like a human. How many years have they known each other, and only now did he say something normal? He frowned and thought, is he the one with the sharp tongue? Let him remember himself, he's still babbling like that in front of his student. Master Tony opened the curtain and said, okay, let him come in, he will show him his works. The protagonist followed him and found himself in a large room full of weapons. The master pointed his finger down and said, each of these products has its own mark, meaning that it is handmade. After a while, Teacher Tian asked Hanwoo, did he like any of these? The protagonist remained silent in response. He put his hand to his chin and thought, now he first of all needs to prepare for the Imperial Academy's tests. For this, he will need a goo jar, which costs 4 divinity, and in points it is slightly less than 600 million. He pointed his finger up and said, he needs a 2-star artifact goo jar. Goo, this is a poisonous parasite. Goo jar, a 2-star artifact, the first function is goo purification. Allows 100,000 insects to be placed inside to conduct a goo purification ceremony. Insects will fight each other, and the last surviving creature will evolve. The highest possible level of evolution, this is the heroic form. The second, additional, function is to attract insects. Attracts insects from the surrounding area. The radius of the function depends on the amount of divine power invested in the jug. Teacher Tian looked closely at the protagonist and thought, 2-star artifacts are not famous for their high power, but the goo jug is perfect for Han Wu, an excellent choice. Master Tony approached him and said that the jug would cost him 4 divinities or 580 million points of divine power. Can he handle it? Teacher Tian put his hand on his shoulder and said, Tony, let him give him a discount for old time's sake. Or throw in another artifact. If not, he will still find a way to recoup. Master Tony remained silent in response, and then took out the thing and said, okay, for 600 million he will throw in another very useful artifact, the Eye of Identification. After a while, Han Wu came out with bags and happily said, well, we're done with the shopping, now we can go home. At that moment, Master Tony asked him to wait, his dear guest. He came up and coughed and said, recently fragments of technology from an ancient civilization fell into his hands, and he created one interesting artifact. The protagonist turned around and looked at it in surprise. The master thought it would suit him perfectly. Teacher Tian took the thing in his hands and asked to take a look. He put it to his eye and thought about it. The teacher got angry and shouted with displeasure, horror, Tony, he was treating him like a friend, and he was trying to deceive him. He checked this useless ball, there was not a drop of energy in it, and he did not notice any functions. Does he take him for an idiot? Master Tony put his hands on his shoulders and asked him to calm down, and at least listen for a start. If he understood everything correctly, the ancients called this artifact a hungry wolf. This, as he said, useless ball is capable of improving itself by absorbing other artifacts. The hungry wolf is an artifact belonging to an ancient civilization that lived and prospered by stealing and collecting various artifacts. However, such artifacts are bound to their owner and cannot be used by other gods while the original one is alive. After the fall of that civilization, the ruler of the Ming dynasty began collecting their most valuable artifacts and was greatly disappointed when he learned about the peculiarity of these. Then he ordered his most skilled craftsmen to begin studying these. And so, after several generations, the craftsmen finally managed to uncover the secret of one of the artifacts. They created the hungry wolf. The hungry wolf is able to improve itself by absorbing other artifacts. At the same time, this powerful artifact inherits the functions and effects of those it devoured. Dozens of civilizations declared a hunt and began to destroy the hungry wolves so that no one could take possession of such a powerful artifact. In the end, the Ming dynasty itself disappeared under the onslaught of dozens of enemies. Master Tony looked at Han Wu and said, dear guest, he sees that he knows a lot about artifacts, so he decided to offer him a hungry wolf. He is in a good mood today, so he is ready to give it to him for only 1 billion points of divine power. What does he think? The protagonist looked at him carefully and thought, for 1 billion? Somehow too cheap for an artifact, because of which several civilizations were erased at once. Is he trying to deceive him? Master Tony spread his hands in different directions and said, but he will warn you right away, the hungry wolf he created has shortcomings. After all, only part of the technology fell into his hands. His artifact is also capable of improving by absorbing other artifacts, but the improvement itself will be 10 times slower than the original. Also, his hungry wolf can only inherit some passive skills and is absolutely unable to retain any divine skills. Teacher Tian said, he was right, just a useless ball. Master Tony pointed his finger at him and said displeasedly, old man Tian, he can insult him as much as he wants, but he will not allow him to offend his children. The protagonist looked at the master and said, Master Tony, he is willing to buy this artifact for 400 million. Teacher Tian waved his hands and said, Han Wu, 400 million, this is quite a large sum, besides, money does not grow on trees. The protagonist grinned and thought, in fact, even with such shortcomings, the hungry wolf is still a very useful artifact. The function of devouring other artifacts can be especially useful. For example, if he encounters an enemy who owns some powerful artifact, he can greatly weaken him if the hungry wolf deals with the enemy's main weapon. Han Wu said, Teacher Tian, he probably misunderstood him. The fact is that he admires Master Tony's work. He, having only fragments in his hands, was able to practically recreate one of the most powerful artifacts in history. That's why he wants to support Master Tony in this way. But honestly, 400 million is all he has left, and he's not sure that Master Tony would want to part with his brainchild for such a pittance. Master Tony stroked his head and asked if he really thought so, or was he just trying to get a discount? Han Wu replied, he was being completely honest. Master Tony smiled and said, okay, he'll give it up for 400 million. So to speak, money can't buy trust, a hungry wolf can take it now. The protagonist handed the card to the master, and he took the artifact and said, thank you. After a while, Han Wu was sitting on the floor in the house, with artifacts lying in front of him. Everything around was covered in energy. The protagonist dropped a drop of blood on it, and a clot formed in the jug. Han Wu smiled and thought, great, the goo jug recognized him as its owner. Suddenly, a frog jumped out of the jug and Han Wu pointed at it and said, we can begin. He looked thoughtfully at the ball and asked, why didn't the hungry wolf react in any way? Just don't let him tell him that he wants more blood.